Morning, everyone. Welcome to the September 25th, 2014 session of the Prescott Planning and Zoning Commission. I think we have a quorum here today. We got David Stringer on my far right, George Sheets, Terry Marshall, and Len Scamardo. My name is Tom Menser. I'm the chairman. And the staff can introduce themselves as they need. Okay. I will consider approval of the minutes of the last meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any comments or discussion? No? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Say aye.
Aye.
Okay. I'd like to welcome the mayor here. Mr. Mayor. Okay, we're going to start with SUP 14001, 1976 Commerce Center Circle, regarding a cell tower. Right, George?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This request came before you at a previous meeting with action taken on a number of other requests of similar cell towers in completely different types of locations. This particular location, while it's in an industrial zoning district, I'll show you if my pages will unstick, is in close proximity to a number of residential zoning districts and lighter commercial uses, the basis school being the closest immediately to the south. The residential areas across Prescott Lakes Parkway are fully developed. There is also residential back behind the site to the northeast and east of the site. So there's residential along here and then some residential just off of my map to the north. The request is for a cellular communication tower, a monopole type of tower. The tower requested is to be placed on a currently vacant commercial parcel within the Commerce Center. That parcel would still be subject to future development of a regular commercial building similar to those others already in the Commerce Center. We would expect similar use, probably either a commercial use or an office type use for the future building on that site. The basis school is now completed and located just south of this location. That was one of the sites that came up in discussion during your last meeting on this topic about a possible optional location. We do have the representative of Verizon here who will be able to talk to you about those alternative locations that were explored as a result of Planning Commission's request to seek out alternate locations before pursuing your action on this particular location. The site itself is accessed, or would be accessed, via an easement that comes off of the commercial center circle up here. There's an existing curb cut that would provide access to the commercial development of the site. This easement would run along the eastern boundary of that and provide access to a compound for both the antenna and ground-mounted equipment. The compound is proposed in this case to be walled with a partial concrete block wall with some wrought iron fencing along the top of that. I think you'll hear today from the Verizon representative that should this project move forward, that they would heavily landscape that compound to try and disguise it even further, hiding the features of the compound with vegetation. The antenna array, as typical of monopoles, has three separate arrays attached to the monopole itself. Those are, again, subject to some discussion and were subject to discussion at your last meeting regarding the size, the height of the array, and the width of the array on the antenna. So again, that will be something that the Verizon representative can speak to you about. The request for the tower includes two waivers that would be required of the city council to grant it. One would be to the height. Typical requirements would allow 35-foot maximum height in this zoning district. The height limitation of the basis school zoning district immediately to the south is 50 feet. In this particular case, they're asking for 75 feet. That also includes, back to the compound drawing, would also include placement of the compound itself and the setback from the antenna reduced to approximately 22 feet, which is less than the height of the tower, which is also less than the typical requirements for such a tower, and that is that it have a fall distance where it could collapse without impacting adjacent properties. That aspect of it, too, could be discussed by the Verizon representative. The request before you is to make a recommendation for or against special use permit that would then go to the city council for final determination. The special use permit process was specifically established for communications antennas and facilities to allow for consideration of impacts on adjoining properties or nearby properties, whether it's view or impacts such as the fall distance request or noise from generator operation. All of those things are to be taken into consideration as part of the review and approval process, and should be taken into consideration by this commission before making a recommendation. We do have the representative of Verizon here, and I will end my presentation and allow him to speak to his investigation of alternative sites, which you requested at your last meeting. So with that, I will stop. I will take any questions you may have immediately about the basics of this, but I would recommend that we allow the Verizon rep to talk first, and perhaps he may address some of your questions as part of his presentation.
Okay, let's do that. I'd like to welcome Councilman Emerson.
My name again is Reg Destry. I'm working with Verizon Wireless. Thank you for hearing us again. I wanted to give some follow-up on what's occurred since our last meeting and discuss kind of where we're at right now and see what the commission is able to do as far as recommending for approval. I guess what I'd like to do first is discuss a little bit. I don't know that I really explained very well where the search area came from and why we're looking at exactly the location that's currently proposed. And then I'll discuss meeting with the neighbors and review of some alternative options that were brought up here and by the neighbors. So here is a map showing the current sites and the location that we were looking at. So I know this is a little difficult to decipher because some of these roads, like here's the roundabout now, right here. But they're the current sites that surround this area, and I'll show a coverage map that'll give a little bit better idea. Right here we've got a site that is, we call it Northside. It's also called Prescott North. It's the city water tank facility, and there is a lattice tower there. So that site actually does a very good job of covering the high points right here because it's up at a very high elevation and the top of those hills are fairly flat. The next site we have is over along, we call it Willow Lakes. It's actually along Commerce, and this site is about a 65-foot pole, is at a fairly low height and does a good job of covering this area, kind of gets to the reservoir, covers a decent amount of this area here, but it sort of cuts off because right here there is a fairly large hill in the middle of it where Prescott Lakes starts, and it leaves a bit of a bowl. So what I received was a search ring request, and that's what this is right here. This is the area that was targeted by the radio frequency engineer as the area that would most appropriately provide signal to Prescott Lakes, because it'll have one antenna or one group of antenna facing this direction, and then there are two others. So he's likely going to face just northeast to try and get up into the road going through the Dells, and then a bit south to cover along Prescott Lakes Parkway as it goes up the hill. The area going up the hill isn't currently developed, but it likely will be within a few years. So here's a zoomed in version that can give you a little bit better idea why we proposed what we did. This circle here is the same as the last map, but it's a zoomed in version. So now looking, the roundabout area is right here. So the area that really needs coverage is this part of Prescott Lakes further to the southwest, and then down Prescott Lakes Parkway up the hill. And I've actually got a coverage map to go over that. These are a little difficult to decipher, but I'll spend some time really explaining what this thing is. So what you see here is these are the existing sites we have in the surrounding area. They are the nearest sites we have. What these colors indicate, this yellow here indicates that the dominant site in this area is this Willow Lake site. Now that is the site along Commerce. The site here, Prescott North, that's the one that, again, is on the city facility. It's a large lattice tower. It's got great elevation. So what you'll see here is this elevation it has allows that it covers the top of the hill very well. And then, in fact, you'll see over further, it kind of overlaps the site because it shoots right past it and catches the high points again. Well, we have the same basic problem in this area because this area here that has no color and this area here that has no color are the main areas of need. Well, this area right here, our proposed site is right there. So the reason that we were looking in this location is because that is the main area of need. It is the center of the area and allows signal to go in this direction to help Prescott Lakes, go south to cover the parkway and meet up with our next site, the blue site here, Prescott Highway. Now, Prescott Highway does a great job, another city facility, does a great job of covering up and down the highway up until about the Twin Lakes Market where it's no longer dominant. But it just covers there because, again, there's a ridge line here and it blocks it from being able to get into this area. So because of a bowl that's shaped right here, the need is to get into this area. You know, if we start going further to the east with a proposed location, it doesn't shoot back because this ridge line extends and kind of stops, maybe a quarter of a mile south of the interchange there. So that's why we came in with this initial proposal. We thought it was appropriate because of the IT zoning. The location is as far from residential as it could be. Obviously, there are neighbors that are objecting to the location and some of the design aspects. And to that end, we met with the neighbors. And I met with a group of about 8 people and spoke with a few others on the phone regarding some other options that they really thought we should explore. And so the proposed site we have right now is this location called Smoketree. We discussed and essentially looked at 3 other options. The 3 other options that were explored were, we spoke with Basis Schools. They own this tract. I mean, it pinches a bit, but they own basically here to over here. So we talked to them about getting up on the hill to try and maybe even get a slightly shorter site that could at least cover back into Prescott Lakes. They were not interested in leasing land to Verizon. So that went out the window. We also spoke with the Parks folks about going at Watson Lake Park. The Parks folks were not interested. They were concerned about utilizing this space. It's already got heavy use part of the year round, and it would cut down on some revenue that they get and certainly cut down on use of the park. Additionally, once you get over here, you've got some of the dells already starting to pop up right here, and then they extend kind of up to the north and the west. But the main concern was really impact on park use for going over there. We did find out the third option we looked at, we call it our possible APS option, that it would be a site similar. AT&T currently has a cell site on that property. They have co-located, here's a map of the property itself. AT&T is located on a power pole right here. It was previously a 40-foot tall pole. They replaced it with a 60-foot tall steel pole, APS did, and then AT&T's antennas are on the top. And then AT&T has their equipment right here. What we proceeded to do was I called APS because there is currently a 40-foot pole in this location. We requested from APS, would it be possible to replace that 40-foot pole with a 60-foot pole? And they said that they did not have an issue with that. I then actually spoke with the landowner, And we discussed, currently we're proposing about 1,000 square feet for our ground space, including a 12-foot by 26-foot prefabricated shelter. And I discussed with her using a much smaller area than that for our equipment, because that is the basic issue with this property. It does not work as well for the engineer because of technical limitations with going on an APS pole. But the real problem is going to be our ground space, because we need about 600 square feet for our smaller 12-foot by 20-foot shelter. And what you're seeing here in red, this is the property line. So a lot of the area that is used by this market is actually not currently part of their land. It is ADOT use. So that greatly limits, they've got about 7 striped parking spaces, and we cannot eat up 600 square feet of their property. I mean, they're utilizing this right now. You see these are these are U-Hauls that are parked there. They rent those out. The only location that looked to me like it would work was to go here, and then I saw the aerial and realized that this cutout right here that also is ADOT makes this unusable. We can't go right here. This is a drive access they go through to get back to some extra parking they have for now. And this area underneath the power lines, APS was open to it, except there is a primary transformer underneath this tree right here, and there is buried primary power, which we can't sit on top of with our equipment. So that leaves us with an option here that does not work because of ground space and does not work because of technical limitations that we have. The location a bit further to the northeast, going back to this map, this coverage map, as we move toward the northeast, so the site we were just looking at is right here, and you can see there's actually a couple of sites that service that area. The Willow Lake site in yellow is the primary, and then this Prescott North starts to see it as well because the shadow from the hill goes away. But what happens is, if we locate right here, it would do a very good job, probably a better job than the current candidate of getting up into the Dells, just because of its location a bit further to the northeast. But the location then shoots to the southeast and almost immediately runs over an area that there's very good coverage right now. So already a third of the cell site is essentially being wasted. And then coming back this way to the main coverage area, you've got the 1/3 of the site that we really care about. So there's only a third of the site that's really being utilized for what we need it for, and it will not get up quite as far into these areas because the APS pole, the ground elevation is about 20 feet lower, and the pole itself is a bit lower than what we're proposing at the current location. Now, when I talked to the engineer, I started asking him questions like, which of these sites works better for you? And he kept saying the current site, and in fact, we started discussing, all right, well, if we brought the current site down in height, if we compress the antenna array, what are things we could do at the current site to possibly mitigate the impact on neighbors, yet give you a site that works? And so that led me to discussing with him. And what I've got here, last time I was unable, and I apologize, but I did not have a photo simulation of what the proposed site would look like to give some idea on scale. So this is a photo simulation, a before and after. I'm sorry, it is a little dark. I don't know if I can lighten this up or not. Okay. That's a little, well, I don't know. Well, sorry, that's a little on the dark side here with the overhead. But this is from the access drive, the roadway into the cottages. So this is the view folks will have when they're coming out, driving out. And, you know, we've got the school in the picture now. There is the Granite Basin Engineering building. That building is about 20 feet tall to the top of the roof. And this is as it stands now. So here is with a proposed 75-foot pole with a 12-foot wide antenna array. So these antennas are on a cross arm that's about 12 feet wide that's shown there. As I talked to the engineer, what I discussed is how we could shrink that up and maybe make it a little less noticeable. And what we're able to do is, he said that even, you know, we could come down 10 feet on this pole. So instead of 75 feet, we would propose it now to be 65 feet to the top. And then probably bigger from a visual aspect would be this array. It's 12 feet wide as shown. Last time I discussed maybe making it only 9 feet wide. He said what we can do is we can eliminate one of the antennas and only make it 6 feet wide. So it would then be half the width that it currently is shown here. So, I mean, that is a pretty substantial decrease in the visual impact. I mean, the width of that array is generally what people see if they look up and have an issue. In addition, from talking to the folks next door, they had expressed a desire, and we've all along expected that the compound itself would have some landscaping around it. We have not shown that on our drawings yet, but fully expected all along that there would be a requirement to put something around there. And so we're planning on having landscaping around the property, or not, excuse me, not around the property, around the cell site. So in this location, our compound would have pretty standard landscaping. I know the Commercial Association has been insisting upon that as well, and it's pretty standard. So we're doing an atypical block wall that involves the block and then a wrought iron top to match kind of the walls in the area. Proposing some additional landscaping, and a few other things that came up is what we're thinking is to help try and block the view from the cottages. There is some area here, and I've talked to the landowner about this. Going back to the photo simulation, you'll see from this view there is one 12-foot or so tall evergreen, and what you don't see here, there's actually some 20-foot trees that run along the roadway to the north. What we're going to propose is to put 2 to 3 additional trees in this area, kind of close to the driveway, like next to this and then further to the north on our landlord's property, to try and block the view a bit. A 10 to 15-foot tree will certainly help screen the ground equipment and probably cut off about half of the height of the pole from the folks across the street that are looking to view it. Like I said, I spoke with the landlord, and they said that they would certainly be amenable to us putting in a few trees there. Those trees would likely only stay there until the property was fully redeveloped. When someone comes to build a building and does a full landscape plan, those would likely come out at that point. They're kind of there in the interim, or would be proposed to be there in the interim. Some additional things that came up were a discussion of the actual layout of the ground equipment. There had been concern expressed about the way we are located and how close we are to property lines. So what I'm gonna bring up, and I don't know if this is even something that the Planning and Zoning Commission would care about, but we can actually rotate the compound itself 180 degrees, which would move the pole from here up to this location and then put the shelter right here. That would gain another 10 feet to the building, to the Granite Basin building, to the east here, and about 20 feet to the basis property line to the south. Either way, we'll be planning on providing an engineer's letter, stamped engineer's letter, indicating that the structure would remain on property in case of a total failure. And I mean, that is something we can do. We can rotate that. I don't know if that is something that really changes things that much, because really what we're talking about, the main stuff is getting some nice landscaping around the property here, placing a few trees that would be over in this area. Sorry, can't see that. Over in this area along the west edge of the property, kind of at this corner here, placing 2 to 3 trees there to help block the views, because the folks, the cottages are further to the left across the road here. So that's essentially where we're at. I mean, we've met with the neighbors. We've considered other options. This really is the best location for us. We'd like to offer a few accommodations to try and minimize the impact of the site, and receive a recommendation for approval. So I don't know if you have any specific questions, or if there's other locations that I didn't hit that you had questions about.
Well, it looks like you've investigated other locations. I'm not sure you investigated all the possible locations, but I'm not an engineer in that respect. Okay, based on lowering that 10 feet, and based on cutting the array in half, and based on increasing the setback,
Rotating the building.
which would essentially increases the setback,
Right.
What's the reaction from the neighborhood with those changes?
You know, I've talked to some folks. I think there are still going to be people in opposition, and I suspect that many of them will come up and speak. I know that a lot of folks at least have been happy that we've listened, we've considered other options. There are some folks that may think we haven't considered enough options, as you stated, but ultimately, I think that the neighborhood's a little more on board. I don't know that there's ever going to be an option at this location that everyone's going to stand up and say this is the greatest idea ever. I mean, ultimately, I wish there was a building built here. If there was already a 2-story office building in this location, I don't know that we'd even be having this discussion. But for the time being, I think this helps mitigate, and I guess ultimately there will be a lot of folks here that will express their opinion in the next few minutes. So,
okay, commissioners, you have any questions for at the moment? Okay. Anybody in the audience like to get up and speak to this issue?
Mr. Chairman, just before we begin, could I ask one other question? Is it Mr. Destry? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. What was the method you used to communicate with the community? I mean, did you have a list of names, or did you have a meeting?
We did have a meeting. We actually had a meeting at Granite Basin Engineering, and like I said, there were about 8 individuals there. And then I emailed back and forth with David a few times, the gentleman that runs Granite Basin Engineering. Unfortunately, my last communication with him regarding what we were going to be proposing today was only last evening. So, you know, he didn't really have a ton of time to take that in and distribute that information.
And your meeting with the community, the community was notified of this opportunity?
The folks that had requested and talked about it afterwards last time, they knew about it, but no, I did not send out an additional notification to the community. Based on notification requirements for Prescott, those folks wouldn't have fallen in the standard notification anyway, so doing it the way with the folks that we knew were in opposition, I thought was probably the most effective means.
Thanks.
Okay, ma'am.
Good morning.
Name and an address.
Elise Rose, 1690 St. Andrews Way. This application for a special use permit by Verizon is a fill-in a small gap approach and not a critical need. Verizon has asked for their pole to be a monopole, which means they intend to rent out space on their tower to other co-locators, other companies such as Sprint. So what would begin as their installation could quickly morph into 3 to 5 installations requiring antennas, receivers, transmitters, pads, cabinets, increasing the eyesore, increasing the noise pollution and the diesel smell. There have been numerous fires associated with monopole installations. These are caused, but not limited to, regular maintenance welding, electrical malfunctions, birds nesting, and when other co-locators, such as Sprint, add their antenna installations to the pole. And lightning. And as we all know, we get constant lightning in our monsoon season. So, these fires are very difficult to put out, and they have caused the poles to fall and large surrounding areas to have to be evacuated. This would mean basis, this would mean the Commerce Center buildings, and possibly the residents of the cottages and legacy apartments. And as a side note, our Prescott Lakes homeowners have probably already had a negative impact to their property values with the lovely design and appearance of the basis building. And in our meeting with Mr. Destry, when he was asked what happens if the tower does fall, the reply was, "We have plenty of insurance." Thank you very much. I would ask you to not approve this installation. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
Morning. My name is David Benner. I spoke to you last time.
Did you say your name again, your last name?
Yeah, David Benner. My address is 1981 Commerce Center Circle, Suite B. I'm the building right next to there.
Right.
And I got to hand it to Reg. He did meet with us, and I'd like to point out that we initiated that contact. We had not heard from him, so we reached out to him. He did come to meet with us. We initiated that contact. As he said, he did call me last night indicating that he was going to continue with the proposal with the 10-foot reduction in height. he indicated that they lowered the height and the size of the pads to decrease the visual impact, but that's kind of a moot point because it's a co-locatable site. So I don't really understand how that's going to be a benefit in the long term. I still think that alternate sites have not been fully explored. The APS pole site by the Twin Lakes Market, he still has not looked at the adjacent property to the west, which is vacant, and I think he could probably get his structure on there next to that pole. You know, there are 2 properties there, and I don't think he's even explored the adjacent one.
Yeah,
Yeah, that particular one is going to be brought forward as a residential neighborhood. They're going to change that from a commercial pad to a residential. That's
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. There's also other sites to the south, by the way, private property that's undeveloped. And I just want to point out, too, that the location on the property right next to our building has nothing to do with the RF engineering. It has to do with the fact that the property owner wants it in that location to minimize the impacts to his property, okay, at the expense of everyone else. So this is not some RF engineering location on his property. He's trying to tuck it away in the back corner there next to our building to minimize the impacts on his property. There's going to be negative impacts to my property, to the surrounding residential areas. I think it's going to negatively impact the attendance for Basis School. The proposal offers a very small benefit to a very small group of people in Prescott Lakes at the expense of the surrounding neighborhood, including residential areas and my building. And as you know, I reiterated this previously, but every part of this proposal does not conform to any aspect of the Land Development Code. All of the applicable items in the code, it doesn't conform. So that said, I'm against it, so hopefully you'll vote against it. Thank you.
The rotation of the antenna, which in a sense increases the setback to your building, does that make any difference?
I think it increases, I haven't actually seen a rendering of that, but as I understand, it'll move it about 10 foot away.
Okay.
It's still going to be, you know, towering over our building. And again, it's co-locatable, so it might look, you know, really nice and small now, so to speak,
But when there's 4 different arrays on it.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone at all? First one up.
I'm Don Kuchar. I live 1695 Constable Street, and I had to change my cell phone service when I came up from Scottsdale because there's no coverage. It's a safety issue. We don't have good coverage where I live. Now, let's talk about, if this is a commercial zone, it's like people buying next to an airport and a residential and say, I don't like the airplane noise. This has been a zone, they bought in a residential next to a commercial, so they want to stop commercial, just like people want to stop airplanes from flying. Because, well, we bought this residential, but there's a commercial over here. You have to accept the commercial is there and honor those commitments. You got to let the property owner make money because he pays taxes on his property. He deserves the right to use his property properly. But the key thing is, I have to go outside sometimes to get cell phone service. We don't have good cell phone service. Car accidents, emergency service, it's important. I think Verizon has done an excellent job working. I have nothing to do with Verizon, except I'm a Verizon customer now because I changed cell phone service. But I think they are trying to work. But the key thing is, let's do safety coverage. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Larry Mabbitt. I live at 1696 St. Andrews Way, which is about 300 feet or so due west of the proposed site. One thing I'd like to say is that we had a number of people at the last meeting that this was under consideration who were Verizon customers indicated to this commission. that they personally did not have issues with the current coverage. I'm not a Verizon customer myself, I can't speak to that, but many people from the last meeting did say that they had no problem with their coverage. Another thing I'd like to say today is that, as David indicated, we, about 4 of us in the community, reached out to Mr. Destry a couple of weeks after the last commission meeting. We had not yet heard from him, and so we made the move ourselves and reached out to him, and there were 4 of us who did have a meeting with him, which occurred on August 27. And at that time, he agreed to look at some alternative sites, including the ones that he has talked about today. Here we are on September 25, and he doesn't report back to us or communicate with us other than a phone call about 5 o'clock yesterday evening, clearly giving us no time to discuss this or to hear what his amended proposal was like. And I think that's objectionable, that last-minute approach. In terms of the merits and demerits of the location itself, I think we've already heard a lot about the conflict with the Land Development Code with respect to this kind of installation. The code speaks to things such as, and I'm going to quote here, protecting residential areas from adverse impacts of towers and antennas. The code also talks about encouraging the location of wireless facilities in non-residential areas. It also speaks about encouraging the joint use of new and existing tower sites, considering the public health and safety, minimizing potential damage to adjacent properties. So this location, to some degree, does conflict with some of those requirements. We have the setback issue, which may be mitigated by 10 or 15 feet. I'm not sure about that. We have the height in excess of the current zoning limit of 40 feet. We have the eyesore issue, lastly. And finally, with respect to the eyesore issue, it may be that with the current modifications, just roughly 20% of the eyesore issue may be mitigated, but what about future add-on installations, of which there could be 4 or 5? And something which would initially not be that objectionable may turn into extremely objectionable after 4 or 5 additional installations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Deborah Mullins Ott, and I live at 1679 Constable Street in Prescott Lakes. I would like to start out my little comments by asking everyone in this meeting, everyone, be honest, how many of you own cell phones? Raise your hand. How many of you own landlines on top of cell phones? Those of you that raised your hand on landlines, did you raise your hand on landlines because of where you live? You do not have adequate cell phone coverage, so you must have a landline? No. Yes. Raise your hand if you're paying for landline and cell phone because of where you live. Be truthful here. I lived previously at DC Ranch Country Club in Scottsdale for 12 years. 2 homes in there. My mother lived in one of them. We lived a golf hole away. I will tell you, we had the same debate in that community over cell phone coverage because at the base of the McDowell Mountains, you do not have adequate cell phone coverage. We went round and round, and ultimately, Verizon came through and we got cell phone coverage. But they designed the towers to look like palm trees. One of the towers is at Copper Ridge Middle School in DC Ranch. I am hard-pressed to believe none of us here wants the eyesore, but everyone, unfortunately, in 2014 relies on their cell phones. It is what it is. And there is a huge safety issue involved not having coverage with your phones. I live there on Constable. The gentleman just spoke lives on Constable. You cannot even complete calls standing out in your front yard or backyard. You get drop calls all the time. It's a safety issue, huge. The other thing I want to emphasize is, yes, it's an eyesore, but running through Prescott Lakes, you've got these huge electrical towers that provides everyone in this room with electricity. That is a necessity, just like being able to have the ability to contact emergency vehicles when you have emergencies going on in your home. The other thing is I had a horrific experience in May. My 90-year-old mother, Deborah Mullins, lives with us. She's in very poor health. We have been taking care of her for about 14 years now. She lived a Goffle away at DC Ranch, but now she's at the point she has to live full-time with us. She woke up in the middle of the night with congestive heart failure. All right, I'm trying to call for help, and I can't get through because I don't have cell phone coverage. Who do you go to in your neighborhood at 3 o'clock in the morning to have somebody help you out here? So I put a landline in as a result of that. But I really don't think this is debatable. It's a necessity. And maybe Verizon could put a pine tree configuration like the palm trees they did at DC Ranch. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm Tom Coe. I live on 1697 Constable Street, next door to the person here who spoke about weak coverage, and I wanted to respond to the subsequent speaker who said they have coverage. It depends where you live. We have very poor coverage, and as they've been building houses, it was interesting, all the contractors that would go out to the very end of the street trying to get coverage, and I go out with my T-Mobile phone, which was just a tad better than Verizon in coverage, not by much. The cell phone coverage there is absolutely dreadful, so I wanted to emphasize that it depends where you live, and we do need some cell phone coverage in that area, as the last person said, and I concur with her that I think effort should be done to make it less noticeable, whether other locations or better camouflage or whatever options are available. But I just wanted to emphasize those 2 points and lend support to what they've said.
Okay, thank you.
Morning.
Morning.
My name is Bob Cicely. I live at 1629 Gettys View Way, which is in the Parkside community of Prescott Lakes, basically behind Highgate. That kind of keys in a little bit more. I'm a Verizon customer. I have 4G coverage in my home. I realize that I'm in a different position than some of the people who do not have coverage. I can appreciate and I respect the opinions of the other individuals that have been up here that are for this and for the stance of Verizon. I have some concerns about this. The gentleman made a comment about living next to an airport. You expect to hear airport traffic. The thing is that they're asking for a variance. When we purchased homes here, we know that this is a commercial property. If they were to build their structure without asking for variances.
Whoa, hang on a minute. Excuse me. Variances you get at the Board of Adjustment.
Okay, I
It's
apologize.
a special use permit.
Okay. They are asking for a deviation in the current zoning guidelines. Would that be more appropriate to say?
Well, basically, we have a provision for special use permits in the zoning.
Okay, but they're not, if I could, they're not building something that's conforming to the current.
The reason for the special use permits is that when the code went through, it provides an opportunity for the public to express their opinions on commercial areas where they're going to build a building higher than what the minimum was. The minimum used to be 100 feet. In the new code, they dropped it down to 50 to satisfy a number of the objections to some of the potential buildings downtown, like the Summit Bank building, and require a special use permit from anything over 50 up to 100. So it's not a situation where we're trying to change things. What we did is we changed that particular zoning to allow forums like this for the public to be able to come in and show their favor or unfavorable opinions of something, and then require it not only to go through P&Z with an affirmative action or a negative action and go to council with a recommendation, where the council would then make the final decision. So it's a special use permit that is allowed in commercial areas, adjusting the height of various facilities, and it's not a variance.
Okay,
There's
well,
a major difference.
I apologize.
One
this
of
is
our
not-
members here is shaking his head. He's an attorney. David, big difference between special use permit?
Absolutely. It's,
Okay, I apologize for using the wrong words.
That's fine.
This is not my forte. I'm not,
Well, I hope I helped clear it up a little.
well, possibly, but
fairness to
unfortunately,
the gentleman, though, I take your point completely. This is not something that was contemplated by folks who.
okay,
in
that's
that area.
really what I was trying to get across. So when you're building, when you buy by an airport, you understand what you're going to be seeing. When you buy over here, you weren't anticipating to see a 75 or a 65-foot antenna now that could be expanded wider. I do have a home phone. When I make phone calls from my home, I don't use my cell phone. There is some aesthetic issues. Aesthetics are dependent upon each individual's interpretation of it. We do have electric lines that run through there. They were there before we started, before we bought a house. We don't have any choice about it. My biggest concern is going to be the aesthetics, but also the safety issue. We have a safety issue with other structures. The setback and the possibility of this falling is a concern, particularly with the school there. The only thing that, if the board does decide to grant this not going to say a variance, this special use permit, then possibly maybe something aesthetically could be done. These poles are normally shiny silver. Maybe something can be done to tune it down a little bit. I realize that a lot of people depend on cell phone coverage, but maybe something can be done additionally to lessen the impact on everyone else. That's all I just wanted to relay.
Okay, appreciate it. There is a fact that we actually aren't approving it. We're simply making a recommendation to the city council, whatever action we take. George, you have
A couple of points, Mr. Chairman. You are making a recommendation. It is appropriate for you to add conditions if you think they're appropriate for either reducing the adverse impact aesthetically or for safety reasons on the project. You do have the ability to accept the modifications that were proposed by Verizon as conditions of a recommended approval if you want to go in that direction. You can add additional restrictions subject to the limitations that you have as your authority under the Land Development Code. At this point, just based on what we've heard, I've heard Verizon offer to reduce the width of the array from 12 to 6 feet, reduce the height from 75 to 65 feet, rotate the compound so that the actual pole itself is 10 feet further from the east property line and approximately 20 feet further from the south property line, put additional landscaping around the compound that will contain the equipment building and the tower's base, put additional trees on the host property along Prescott Lakes Parkway or near Prescott Lakes Parkway to provide some additional screening from street level. And there was discussion about co-locations. I had a very brief conversation with Mr. Destry regarding co-locates on this particular tower, and there's approximately room for 3 total arrays. We encourage co-location in the city's zoning code. It is an encouragement. A condition could be placed that
Right.
no co-locates be allowed on this particular pole. With their concurrence, that would be something that council could ultimately adopt as part of the approval of the SUP.
okay.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a quick question here?
Sure.
And I'm not sure, if, George, if it's for you or for Mr. Destry, but about how many people are impacted by this poor cell coverage?
Just based on the area, it's definitely over 100, but it's not like it's 1,000 people that are being
100
impacted.
homes or
100 phones at a minimum or devices.
100 phones?
Yeah, so I mean, that could be as little as 50 customers, but I mean, it's more than that. I don't know the exact number. I apologize. I don't have the exact number.
Yeah, you know, on that, there are about 500 lots yet in Prescott Lakes within this area that will likely be built on within the next 3 to 5 years. You know, so there is going to be a lot more demand in that area.
There are 2 already platted subdivisions to the south of this location that go up that hill towards Highway 89 and Prescott Lakes Parkway intersection.
Okay, anyone else in the audience like to speak?
I'll go ahead and say something about this. My name's Daniel Matson.
Hey, Dan.
148 East Merritt Street. So I don't live in this area. I do go to church in this area. We do have coverage there. I'm a Verizon customer. I noticed number 9 makes mention of the general plan. And one of the things we had been talking about when dealing with the general plan was the need for better communications. I'm a Verizon customer because, in my experience, it has the broadest coverage. And, you know, those of us who, I respond to emergency situations on a regular basis, and having dead spots is a problem. That's why I have Verizon. There's hardly any. And, you know, we need the coverage. The general plan says we want complete coverage throughout the whole city with high-quality communications. It's unfortunate that there are some people who may be negatively impacted, but I think we need to consider that going into the future. Having dead spots can be hazardous. If there's an accident that occurs in that dead spot, you know, so many things are handled because somebody with a cell phone can quickly call the police or the fire. It's important to have those dead spots covered. Also, when we talk about poles falling, I doubt if these poles fall very often. I really think that's an unlikely occurrence. I'm sure they designed them to be very sturdy. So I don't think that's a real serious consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Mr. Destry, maybe now it's a little bit lower. Maybe we should go back to the idea of a stealth. Even if it's out of scale, maybe a big old pine tree would look a lot better than the tower. Maybe that would be a little more acceptable to the neighbors.
And, you know, if a pine tree is what you want to do, I will tell you, the pine tree itself, because the branches have to be above the structure, would end up probably being about 75 to the top of branches.
Be taller.
What's that?
It would be tall.
It would be about 10 feet taller to keep the antennas at the same center line of 61 feet. But, I mean, it would be back at that 75-foot top height, really. But that's just so the branches can have a decent shape to them.
Okay. Could I have a comment from anybody in the audience regarding that suggestion?
My name is Charles Crothy. I live at 2503 Marion Court.
I didn't get the last name, sir. Carl.
Crothy, K-R-O-T-H-E. I'm in direct view of the basis school that went in, and it went in after I bought my house a little bit over a year ago. That really impacted my views. A tower with a lot of things hanging from it, hanging behind the basis school, isn't going to be a thing of beauty when you're trying to look at the granite dells from Prescott Lakes. Making it look like a pine tree, to me, seems to be somewhat of a compromise. Even if it's a little taller, it's going to look a heck of a lot better.
Well, that's what I'm beginning to think. I don't know. Anybody else in the audience have a comment on that?
I don't know if they've really explored all the other sites too, like some of the other people have asked about.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Tom Coe up here before. In direct regard to your question, yes, I think a taller palm tree would probably be better than just the bare tower, even a little shorter. And I didn't mention the last time that living next door to him, we're looking right out from our front porch. We see the basis school and right where the tower would be. So I can give you from that standpoint, certainly, even if a tall palm tree looks a little out of place, that would still be better than a cell tower.
Or a pine tree.
Pine tree.
Of course, if there's any buildings built on that corner, you know, it's gonna block a lot of it. So maybe you'd just be seeing the top of a pine tree, right? And I'm sure that site will be built out someday on that corner. Anybody else in the audience like to speak?
Larry Mabbott again. I'm not. We did see at the last meeting a visual of a stealth
Right.
pine tree.
Right.
It's more visual area instead of a skinny pole. It's a wide thing. It looks artificial.
Yeah.
So I think it would sort of look like a giant outdoor artificial Christmas tree. I'm not sure that that's a great idea, especially given the fact that it would be taller of necessity.
Okay.
Mr. Destry provided this as an example
Okay.
of the type of facility. Mr. Chairman, an alternative and one that was going to be recommended by staff is to paint the pole a light gray color that would help blend it with the background. Not a shiny color, not dark blue. The sky rarely stays the blue that it is today.
Yeah, I'm not sure that would be.
The light gray would blend in the
I'm
best.
not
We
sure
found on other.
that would do a whole lot. Okay, Counselor. We know that certain parts of the zoning code, such as the setback and the height can be varied, setback can be varied. Those are issues in which we would be able to recommend that this not be built, okay? But there are certain issues that you're going to tell us that we can't consider in a recommendation, right?
Right. Mr. Chairman and commission members, the city's zoning authority or decision-making authority is somewhat limited by the Federal Communications Act. And those, the limitations, although not completely, or not wiping out the city's decision-making authority, are these. One is that the city can't, what's called unreasonably discriminate amongst providers. So, in other words, it gives the city some flexibility to treat certain facilities that create different visual, aesthetic, or safety concerns differently to the extent permitted under the zoning code. Different zones can be treated differently. Different heights can be treated differently. But similar, like has to be treated alike, essentially, under the Federal Communications Act. Certainly, commercial versus residential placement can be treated differently. I think that the challenge here for the commission and ultimately city council is that a decision cannot, and this is a quote from the FCA, can't prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting cellular service. So in other words, the question sort of, perhaps for Mr. Destry, and certainly one that is going to be within your discussion and your decision making, is if this is denied, does this effectively prohibit cellular service in this particular area? And even granted that it's a relatively small number of current users, that one would presume that this is for the future 400 or 500 lots that may come in that are possibly affected by this. And so does the denial in this situation effectively prohibit or precludes cellular service in that bowl area? It's really a discussion, I think, that should be had. And then last but not least is, and it hasn't come up today, it did come up in the past, it's sort of environmental concerns regarding radio frequency cannot be even really discussed so long as Verizon in this particular case is complying with Federal Communications Act in terms of the design of the facility itself, which I assume is the case, that it's complying with all of the federal requirements. In other words, the federal law sets the minimum requirement. Beyond that, the city has no authority really even to discuss the radio frequency or the issue. So that's what the Federal Communications Act sort of limits, I guess, to some degree. It doesn't prohibit the city from using its zoning authority, but there are some limitations that need to be considered.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioners, any questions
Mr. Chairman,
for the counselor there?
I still have a question about the safety issue. Is it a real issue? I'd like for Mr. Destry to address that again, the possibility of the pole falling, the possibility of it being struck by lightning and starting fires that I heard one of the audience members mention. Is that real, or could it be real?
Thank you for the opportunity to address that question. As far as poles starting on fire, I have, in my 15 years of doing this, seen one structure that did in Las Vegas have a welding incident, and some of the cable inside started on fire. They put out the fire, and the pole itself was fine. I'm not familiar with any times when it's actually happened where a pole has caught fire, and there's been a failure because of that. In fact, sometimes Forest Service sites, like we had a tower up in Alpine when the fire went through there, and in a case like that, I mean, the fire wasn't obviously caused by the structure, but the structure did have some bend from a massive forest fire. But I'm not aware of a structure like this one that would have caught fire or even been subject to a fire causing a collapse. And that the question about whether it could fall over, I mean, it is designed to not do that. And I can't really say a whole lot beyond that. An engineer designs it, the foundation, the structure itself. They order a specific strength of steel, and whether that's for one carrier or two carriers or whatever, they consider all of that. And in fact, there was just a code revision to further strengthen every tower. Most of the towers we have up now have to be upgraded based on the code they were built under, and as those codes advance, in fact, we often have to structurally to upgrade towers just to stay up with the current code. So I mean, even if codes do change going forward, the structures become stronger and stronger. So I'm not familiar. I honestly have never heard the comment that previously came up about structure fire issues. So
follow up though, how about the incidents? Has there ever been one that has actually collapsed and fallen over on any adjacent properties?
I'm not personally aware of a monopole like this. Some of the real old guide towers, the stick that has the big guys coming off from it, I've heard of some anecdotes of farmers out in the field and trips a guy, and in that case those towers start to crumble. They don't fall over. But I'm not familiar with a structure that's actually come down a monopole. It's basically designed to withstand about 105 mile an hour, 3-second burst of wind. So even with a very, very, very strong microburst, these things are staying up. I mean, there was a microburst near my house in Phoenix that had 100 mile an hour winds, and there are cell towers. It's like cell tower, bent tree, bent wooden power pole, but the cell tower's standing straight as an arrow still.
And how about the lightning issue that one of the members of the audience brought up?
That is a very valid point they make. In fact, these sites are all grounded because lightning probably is more of an issue for us than it is for neighbors because of all the radio equipment we have. Direct lightning strikes are a big issue. So the sites are grounded. There's in fact a ground ring around the foundation of the pole buried in the ground. There's a ground ring around the shelter so that any direct lightning strike will go to ground.
Okay. All right, anybody else in the audience? Last chance.
Mr. Chairman, while we have Mr. Destry there, I wanted, if I
Go
may
ahead.
ask a question about
Dave.
this co-locatable aspect.
Certainly.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but normally you would co-locate with other providers, is that right? And there would be some revenue to Verizon from that if you let AT&T or Sprint or somebody use your site. Okay.
That is
So
correct.
So what would be the impact if the recommendation was to restrict co-location, because we didn't want to, you're making it smaller by limiting the number of antennas. If we co-locate and put more antennas back, that's going to mess that up. So what would be the impact to you if we recommended, we don't decide, if we recommended that there be no co-location?
There really would be none. I mean, generally we build a structure capable of handling additional carriers, but that's more because most jurisdictions at a minimum, prefer and sometimes require co-location. If you want to limit it to one carrier, that's not a problem at all.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else in the audience?
In regards to the fire issue, all over the internet, you can see the instances. So, you know, Mr. Destry may not have heard of anything, but all you have to do is look on the internet. That's where I got my information, in newspapers, reports. So it does happen.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else?
Yeah, my name, sorry, Max Phipps, Phipps. I live at 1669 Constable Street. And I know, you know, we're going to go back and forth on fire issues and so on and so forth, but I don't know how many cell towers there are here in town, but let's just say there's a dozen, and this is a microcosm of the United States. Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? Probably not. I have only lived here for a short period of time. I come from a metropolitan area where there probably were thousands of cell towers, and I'm not aware that that has ever been a problem. Again, possible, yes. Likely, I think not. And I will say I am a Verizon customer. I do live in the affected area, and I do have extremely poor cell coverage. I sent an email. I don't know if you got it. I sent it to I think to the Public Works Department. I asked that it be passed on. And one of my concerns was what people have spoken about before is just the safety issue for folks who don't have landline phones, that in the event of an emergency, that they can't get through. I am one of those people that if I need coverage, I have to go outside, and it's somewhat spotty. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I would hope that you'll go with you know, some of the recommendations that Verizon has made. One other thing that I did think about is when you're talking about co-location, is I know you might be leaning towards saying that it could be only AT&T, or I'm sorry, Verizon. But let's say next week AT&T wants to locate a pole. You might be going through this all over again if they want to locate one in the same area. So I'm just throwing that out for food for thought.
Good point. That's a good point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
David Bennett, again, 1981, Commerce Center Circle.
Right.
I would like to see the affected area. The comment was made that there's 400 or 500 lots in there that are undeveloped, but there's nowhere near that in this small pocket. In fact, I would guess that it's probably completely developed in this small area. I would like to see that pocket that they're trying to cover overlaid on a map, because we haven't even really seen that. So we do have a very high-level map, but I would like to see that. I would be curious. I would venture to say it's nowhere near 400 or 500
I can
lots.
show you a spreadsheet. I can show you a spreadsheet of that. I handle the architectural review at Prescott Lakes, and I know exactly where all the vacant lots are.
Yeah, I would like to see that. And also, I would just like to point out that, you know, we're not against, you know, cell phones. I'm a Verizon customer. We're not against it. We recognize there is a need there, and you know, and that should be filled. There are safety issues. All we're saying is just a bad location. It's bad, you know. It's just right up next to our building, tucked back in the corner of this property. That, you know, it's great for the property owner, but not really good for everyone else. So we're just really questioning the logic of the site.
Okay. I understand. Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Okay,
I have a question.
Okay.
Deborah Mullins anyway, whatever. Ought to know better for being here, I'll tell you that. I'm missing out on my coffee clutch. No, I'm only kidding. I have a question of the city manager. And my question, or city attorney?
City attorney, yeah.
You're sitting where Craig normally sits, so I'm looking at Craig McConnell, okay? But would you tell us the legalities again of what the FCC says as far as cell phone coverage and what power the cities have over whether or not a coverage can go in as far as emergencies?
I thought we covered most of that. I don't know if you can get specific about that.
I can't. I mean, with if Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I can address the issue.
Sure.
The Federal Communications Act has some limitations on the city's zoning authority. One of the limitations is that the city, and quoted from the act, is cannot prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting. That's the close quote. Cellular service, So, in other words, the question for the commission, ultimately the city council, is this an appropriate location, or does the denial of this location effectively prohibit cellular service? And again, you're talking in a sort of micro, sort of at the micro level, not at the macro level. In other words, certainly the city couldn't ban cell towers. That's sort of a no-brainer, easy issue. Question on a micro level is does the denial of this effectively prohibit cellular service? I'm not saying it does or it doesn't. It's really sort of perhaps for Mr. Destry to state or not, and certainly something for this commission and ultimately the council to consider, that if it's denied, does it effectively prohibit cellular service in the particular service area of the tower?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've pretty much established
All right.
that.
I just want to make sure, because thus far, it sounds like Mr. Destry has spent an enormous amount of time trying to find other viable locations. And I was hopeful we could just settle with the relay tower where we are, and maybe be where at the one location on Commerce where APS is. That would have been ideal, because then we could probably put a relay where we are. But all right, thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to close the public hearing. And commissioners, I need you to
Well, I have
me
a
what you
question
think.
for Mr. Destry, and that is, the co-location that might resolve like the monopole look or whatever, but it also then could bring the likelihood that another carrier would come in and be right back here again with us, and then we're going to have a whole forest of these things rather than one. And so if you did a stealth in the pine tree thing, then would anyone ever even notice that you were co-locating additional servers? So we could add Sprint or T-Mobile or whoever on that, and it would not impact negatively the community.
The visual impact of additional carriers on a pine tree especially is almost nil. Once the tree is there, you're not going to change the appearance of that by adding additional antennas below the current antennas.
Right. The other is when you were talking about articulating the building and the monopole, if that was a pine tree, George, if you can show us that photo with the rendering of the projected location, it looked like by moving that around a bit, that then you'd have a pine tree behind a pine tree, and you wouldn't even see all the base of that.
This one sort of shows it. I think the one
Yeah,
Mr.
no, it's the
Destry
one-
had was a little better.
It's the one with the tree. Yeah, the tree's a lot bigger than that.
Okay.
No, that's a different one. There it is. See if they articulate that around to move the pole on the other side, then it's kind of sitting behind that other pine tree.
Okay, so that's what you would lean towards, going with a stealth installation?
Well, I guess if a motion was to be made, I guess you could limit them to 65 feet if it wasn't a stealth, or 75 feet if it was a tree, and let the council make that call by getting a little bit more public opinion on whether that's.
Is that where you're coming from? Is that what you want to do?
Well, that seems like it's a more logical step. It satisfies some of the needs.
Well, okay. I mean, I'm going to have to get a motion here in a few moments, one way or the other.
Anyone else, Dan?
Sure, go ahead. Anybody got
No.
something to say?
All right, then, George, I'm going to need some help on this while you're finishing with your papers. I wrote some notes, but at my age, my handwriting isn't very good. So anyway, my understanding of today is that you're willing to make some concessions on locating, rotating, moving, landscaping, and et cetera. And you also voice no objection or financial responsibilities to increase or reduce your cost on this by having it co-located, so you're not objectionable to a provision about non-co-locating. And I'm ready to make, because it is zoned, we're in a commercial area, it is allowed,
Industrial
And,
area.
and with the changes that you're making, I can recommend that we approve SPU 14-001, subject to the following conditions. And I think, George, you might have better notes than I do to...
So are you looking for the 6 or
looking for
7
the
that we listed
65
off a few moments ago?
65 as a pole, but
Okay.
70 or whatever they need if it's a pine tree.
So what staff
And give
listed
them
for
the
you
choice.
earlier was 6-foot wide arrays,
6-foot wide arrays,
60
no collating,
65-foot height, 65-foot height, if it isn't a stealth
Yes,
arrangement.
correct.
Do you want to make this motion an option of stealth or no stealth?
Yes,
with
either
the height
or, that's their
variance?
opinion. And rotate the building to the other side of the property, and a 10-foot landscaping around the base, the additional landscaping around the rest of the property going along the road. And I think I've covered them all, and I'm willing to modify the recommendation if some of the commission members had notes that they could.
Well, I think on the
clarifi-
co-location, if it's a pine tree, I believe that the co-location would be acceptable. And of course, that gives them a little motivation in terms of possible revenue offset too. And
Okay.
So it sounds like what you're proposing is an either-or situation.
And I could accept George's recommendation that if it's a pole, no co-locating, but if it's a stealth, they could co-locate.
Okay, make that a condition.
So if it's a stealth arrangement, it could have co-locations within the structural integrity of the pole.
Right.
And a maximum height of 75 feet for the stealth, for the
Right.
tree.
Okay, are you making
If
this a
it is-
motion?
Yes.
Okay,
And did we articulate it in the motion? We moved it around?
yeah.
The building, the compound will be switched so that the monopole will be
Okay.
further from, it'll be in the northeast corner of the compound.
Do
as
I have a
opposed
second to that
Or
motion
northwest
and
corner.
conditions?
I'll second.
Okay. George, you have anything more to comment on it? Terry, you have any comment?
Just, Mr. Chairman, a clarification that the 6-foot array would also apply in the motion to any, if it were a stealth and they were co-located, the 6-foot array would apply to those as well, I think is what I'm.
Yes.
I don't think,
I don't think he needs to make it smaller if it's a stealth, do you?
Okay. Okay. All right, I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? My only comment is, I don't think all the locations had been, in the area, had been completely searched. And I'm really concerned about the setback. So I'm probably going to not approve this, but that's okay. We've got a motion and a second. All those in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Motion passes. All right, I'm going to take about a 5-minute break here, let the room clear, and then we're going to go on to the replat, the Ranch at Prescott replat. We're doing it right after we finish with the ranch.
Yes, of course, thank you.
This shouldn't take long. It won't take long. I know.
You know, Tom, like Granite Basin's recommendation to move it out closer to the curb and out to the road, that puts it right within the residential apartment complex over there.
I thought they took take them individually. On some occasions, we've done that. Reasons why.
I was hoping to give everybody that.
Right, yeah.
Larger unsubdivided portion to the north. So this just gives you a general idea of where we're talking about. This is the ranch, Unit 8. What we have are the boundaries of the ranch, Unit 8, here. The unsubdivided parcel here. You can see Gateway Boulevard and the mall to the north. Lee Boulevard is along the eastern side, And then as you proceed west off of the map, I believe you run into state trust lands. The zoning of the area is bounded by the blue or purple lines on the map. Single-family zoning down here, this is the SF9, which is the primary zoning for the lots on the ranch. This multifamily is the primary zoning for the area that I mentioned before as larger unsubdivided parcels. This is just a little bit of a blow-up showing the lots in question and how the rearrangement of those lots would occur. These lots, as identified by the lighter the dashed lines surrounding them, would be reconfigured or removed entirely. So you have 2 lots that are removed entirely from this unit, 3 lots that are having a portion of those lots removed and made a part of this larger parcel, and then 3 lots over here where the lot lines are being adjusted, and in this case, lots are being combined together to create a wider area that will provide for a street right-of-way for future connectivity to the north, again, partially for future development of that unsubdivided parcel, zoned multifamily at this point in time. Back to the aerial, you can see here is an area that was previously graded and has been planned for connectivity into this parcel. That is already planned for the point of connection. The lots reconfigured would be these that would provide an additional point of connection here. So when development of this project or process should occur, that this connection could be made for the connectivity of development within this site. That's a future issue, not directly addressed by this application, except for the fact that we're creating this stub to allow for that street connectivity in the future. So the request is actually to remove a portion of these lots, moving them into connection with the larger parcel up here, and rezoning those portions that are being moved to the same multifamily medium zoning as the larger parcel. It sounds a bit complicated. It really isn't if you consider that the future development of the larger parcels will require some additional land area, and that's what's being affected by this being removed from the Unit 8 subdivision and attached to the larger parcels for their future development. All of the remaining lots within Unit 8 meet or exceed, in fact, all exceed the minimum lot size required by the zoning district. That was addressed in the staff report. On the first page, the smallest of the lots that would be created would be 18,000 plus square feet, and the minimum lot size requirement's 12,000. I'm sorry, I said SF12 for the single family. It's not SF9, it's SF12. So 12,000 minimum lot size. The minimum lot size being created is 18,000 plus. So we are, from a staff perspective, looking at purely ministerial approach to this. They're trying to remove some of the lots and attach them to something else, and they will be planned for, submitted, reviewed, and developed later at the multifamily zoning.
And give them access to that multifamily site.
Correct.
Right,
something that would be required at that point in the future anyway.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions? Okay.
We do have the representative of the property owner here if you'd like to ask questions, or if you'd like for them to briefly explain what their plans are.
Probably be a good idea. Scott, you want to kind of briefly explain what's going on here?
Yes, I'm Scott Lee with Bullwacker Associates, and we're at 300 North Lee Boulevard. This is just we're trying to open up this piece of property for development, and we've had some inquiries, and basically these changes are to kind of allow us to design this and still have access for different projects, but all on the same piece of property.
Okay. You guys know basically what we're doing? It's pretty straightforward.
Very familiar with it, very
Okay.
straightforward, don't have any problem with it.
George?
Well, I guess,
Any
you know,
questions for Scott?
having that secondary access through the middle of there to there certainly helps. I guess if it's multifamily, you'll have fire sprinklers anyway. You know,
Yes.
probably. I know that the city of Prescott's planning on,
They're gonna want to.
where's that last picture there you had, George? Yeah, the city of Prescott's got plans to connect the mall to the Circle Trail, and so that would come right along here. That's city of Prescott property there along that wall, and and so you'd be connected to an amenity that's there that's probably attractive for multifamily. And
Well, absolutely. With that being multifamily, the mall there would be really a great project,
Yeah.
or a group of projects.
Now, when you're saying multifamily, you're thinking townhouses, patio houses?
We've had inquiries on those. We've also had some inquiries on some apartments, but I think it's going to be kind of a mix of everything. And it's not going to all be developed by one person. It's going to end up being probably developed by several different people.
So some attached housing, probably.
I think whatever the zoning will allow.
Yeah. Well, with multifamily, you can almost do whatever you want.
We would anticipate a subdivision plat occurring to create additional larger parcels
Larger
for the
parcels,
developments.
split up into different uses, probably. Yeah.
Yes.
Yet to be determined.
Well, once we get the boundaries, then we can start working on that part.
Right.
We also have the secondary benefit of, if you'll notice, the property lines currently run through the existing ranch house on the property. This sort of moves that all back onto that larger parcel where the primary ranch location has been.
Okay.
you've been grubbing in there some. We see. I was out there walking around a while back, and
We've been doing some road studies to see
Yeah.
the feasibility of getting a road across there and how it would affect the land. We found out that once you put the road, then we have to subdivide it. We thought we could actually get a road in there without subdividing it, but we can't. So this is the first step of that.
And all your streets are city streets, is
They
that
are,
right?
yes.
That you, as a developer, build them, and then the city takes them over with the-
Absolutely.
Okay, commissioners, any questions? Scott? No?
No.
Anybody in the audience? Thanks, Scott. Anybody in
Thank
the
you.
audience like to speak to this? No? Okay, we can act on these, right?
Yes, sir, I would recommend
do
two
it.
separate motions.
Two separate motions? Okay, let's do the replat first. Replat 14003. Do I have a motion?
Yeah, I'll do that. Make a motion to replat under RP 14-003, the Rancho Prescott Unit 8, removing all or a portion of the lots 863, 864, 865, 866, 867, 866, revising the plat of lots 860, 861, 862, 863, 864, 865, and creating a new 68-foot street right-of-way.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? No, all those in favor, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, rezone. 14-002. I'll entertain a motion.
You got it, George.
You want me to do it? Okay.
Sure.
Make a motion for rezoning of 3068 Wild Rose Way, the Rancho Prescott Unit 8, from a single-family 12,000 square foot SF12 to a multifamily medium MF-M zoning district. APNs 103-44-134, 103-44-133, 103-44-132, 103-44-130, 103-44-129, and 103-44-128.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Motion is second, any discussion? No? All those in favor, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to go back to item number 3, discussion of the general plan. Okay, George, you kind of want to lead us into this, get us going again?
Well, as we discussed at your last meeting, the Planning Commission's responsibility is to review and make a recommendation to the City Council for an update to the general plan. Over the past couple of years, 2.5 years approximately, the city-appointed General Plan Committee has been working on the draft language and ultimately concluded their work and submitted it to you a couple of months ago for your consideration and action. At our last meeting, we talked about how you would go about the review and recommendations associated with the plan, and I believe there was a consensus that each of the commissioners picking out or finding particular focus areas was the most appropriate means of moving forward without having to go line by line through the entire document at a meeting. You certainly have the ability to do that should you choose to, but it has been thoroughly reviewed and recommended to you by the General Plan Committee with the language you have before you today. You also have a number of recommendations from citizens who have reviewed the plan and proposed changes or modifications to certain parts of the plan. Again, as we talked last meeting, using those comments along with the Commission's comments and focus areas will get you a rather focused review process rather than a scattered review of the entire document line by line. It will also save you from being here 2 years, going back through the plan line by line. I think that's the basis for how we ended the last meeting, and I believe the onus was placed by the chair on the planning commissioners to come with some talking points, issues they'd like to discuss or issues they have questions about. With that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, I think that's probably what we did establish the last meeting. We definitely came to the conclusion that we needed to avoid a line-by-line critique. Although I know Lindsay pretty much did that. So, which I read every bit of, Lindsay, actually. So we kind of came to the conclusion that we're going to just we were going to get focus areas, and it seemed to me that with the exception of one issue that I have a problem with, most of what had been discussed and brought up weren't so much problems with the general plan, because I think the General Plan Committee did a wonderful job, very thorough. It wasn't so much problems with it. There were certain elements and focus areas that we kept coming back to because they didn't either seem to be emphasized enough, or there were certain omissions that we felt should be included. Okay, so it wasn't, so those are the kind of things that we were kind of focusing in, concentrating on towards the end of the last meeting. And I know I kind of went through all the commissioners and said, you know, what's important to you? I know David had some comments on affordable housing, which he might want to expand on. Ken Maverack had some comments on recovery homes. He felt there should be something in there. He had some comments on ways to produce additional city income, whether it's business licensing or something like that. So that's open to discussion. Joe had some comments on, he felt public transportation should be emphasized more. So did Lindsay, so did I. And he also mentioned that we needed to, there should maybe be something in there regarding future technology, whether that's has to do with communications or whether it has to do with, you know, cars that drive themselves or something, you know. So he had some ideas about that. We might have to get those next time. And he also had a concern about recovery, having something in here related to recovery and rehab. So anyway, commissioners, any comments? Who wants to start? Who wants to say anything?
Well, you know, Terry and I were
Yeah, I didn't expect you
on the
guys to
committee here, and so
I was
so
gonna give you
I kind of said if I didn't get my words in during the meetings in the committee, and anything I brought forward, if it was not accepted by as consensus or something, then I'm not going to bring anything up afterwards that's anything of my individual spin agenda or things I want in there. I had my opportunity for 3 years.
Right.
And so the only additional input I have might be to assist the other members in understanding it, or I did go through Lindsay's, great recommendations and writings, as well as we had a representative from the county health department that had, now there's a federal and a county buzzword kind of thing now on healthy communities or something. So I thought, well, it isn't a program that we're initiating. We don't know what it is. They don't know what it is for sure, but we ought to at least put in some hooks in the plan to where we recognize there's this activity going on out there. See, part of the understanding of the general plan is it isn't directive to the city to take the general plan and do everything in that as if it owns it. It's a community-wide plan that takes everybody working as a community together to chip in and help bring it forward. And so, that's a comment I'll make on that. So, the city will choose at some point what it does regarding the items that it feels with which it can take a lead on or participate in as a jurisdiction. But then the general plan is broader from a community-wide perspective.
Okay, is there anybody in the audience who'd like to speak to how we're going to be moving this thing along, and whether you have specific ideas or comments or whatever?
Good morning. My name's Trevor Burr, last name spelled B-U-H-R, with the Arizona Game and Fish Department. Our corporate address in Kingman is 5325 Stockton Hill Road, 86409. I just had a couple quick comments that I wanted to share relating to the planning effort. And that is, first of all, that in a very general sense, upon reviewing the plan, I found the plan to be very thorough, very well organized, in addressing most of the issues that as a state agency we do in fact have concerns over. Along the lines that Mr. Menser brought up about some questions about the level of detail in some places, the emphases that we would like to see in place. There are a few places within the plan that I'm hoping within the next few weeks to be providing the planners with some details as it relates to the economic importance of hunting and fishing, related recreation to this state, and along with the hopes that there might be some incorporation of that language, recognizing the value of partnering with the state agency that has oversight for wildlife management to ensure that the resources that draw this type of economic activity to the area remain in place for the long term. So specifically, I do have a few things, comments that should be forthcoming as it relates to the open space component. We do have resources that we've developed over the last few years relating to open space and wildlife connectivity in the form of linkages that are captured in data layers that we're going to be providing to the city for reference materials, perhaps as an appendix to the plan, as well as in the recreation component, there was discussion of development of lake plans for Watson and Willow Lake. And we do, in fact, have a regional fisheries program manager that is hoping to partner in that effort, because while you have local recreation plans that are tied to those lakes, we too have fishing plans related to those lakes, and it would be beneficial for us to recognize the partnership that could foster those recreational opportunities for our constituents and your recreating public. So I'm not going to tie things up here for a long time, but just wanted to make folks aware that you should be expecting some comments from us in the very near term.
Very
you.
good.
Any questions for me?
No, but I'm glad to see you here today because I have about 10 different focus items that I wanted to discuss, and one of them that I felt was not giving enough emphasis in the general plan, so I made a paragraph here regarding lakes. It seems to me that over the last few years, the lakes haven't been able to sustain fisheries, and I was talking to a gentleman regarding that who said there was some grants that had been offered to the city that the city didn't take to desilt those lakes. So here's what I wrote down. The city parks and recreation should coordinate efforts with game and fish and federal state sources for grants and funding to desilt and restore the lakes to previous lake conditions and habitat to encourage a permanent fish population for the recreational enjoyment of the users of the lakes resources and ensure a healthy water conditions. That's something that I felt I didn't see in the general plan, so I felt there should be something in there. So your coming here today was very interesting.
Well, I appreciate hearing that, and that is an area where we do in fact have trust, responsibility, and expertise, and it would be our hope that as we move forward and as those plans are developed, that we can provide our expertise to assist in their development.
Okay. Of course, we're, on a time frame.
We're anticipating coming back the end of October.
Okay.
For you to take action, so there's time to either defer that action one more meeting or to have additional meetings if you need to, or just plan on having a thorough discussion at the...
I guess what I was doing here was actually inviting cooperation with Game and Fish, getting that in the general plan that
And he and I have had a discussion recently, earlier in the meeting, about providing us the data links and things that we can include with maps so that will make it a little bit easier for you to actually look at his recommendations.
Good.
And
Maybe that's an item I can say we have consensus on.
Yeah, well, I think, we're trying to balance, the general plan is remaining general and more of a policy strategic, and there's a group that's going to look at the Unified Development Code, the Land Development Code, and some of these, the how-tos and the details, some of that would best be put in there rather than try to bring that up front in the general plan. It's primarily a visionary type intent there.
Yes, and I think you're right on the mark there. In our participation with the development of Yavapai County's general plan, working with their planning folks, much of what we were advocating for recognition of within the body of the plan was embodied in the appendices that followed. So, in any case, thanks for your time.
Hey, thank you very much for coming. Yes, sir.
Gary Ian Warab, 1638 White Oak Circle, Prescott. I want to thank Trevor. I was formerly chairman of a subcommittee for the lakes, and we did have, as a speaker, predecessor, I can't remember his name right now, from, no.
Fisheries program?
Yeah. Andy Clark was here, and we spoke specifically about the future of Watson Willow Lake, and he made probably the same recommendations that Trevor will to drain and dredge, or to dredge. But I would like to accept, as a former member of the general plan, or recommend what you just mentioned. I thought it was very appropriate what you said about input into lakes rather than go into specific details.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to keep it general. And I was including Goldwater in that too, because I think Goldwater, the lake itself could be greatly improved, although the amenities around the lake are really wonderful. Yes, ma'am.
Miriam Habrick, 1475 Valley Ranch Circle. I am the co-chair of the General Plan Committee with Terry Marshall. And we started the first meeting on May 18th, 2011. So we all know that it's been 3 years and an opportunity for all of us to learn a lot, and it has been a growing experience. I'm only standing here to commend the committee for the work that they did
and that we voted to move this forward to planning and zoning so that you in turn can make the changes that you feel necessary in order to pass it on to the City Council. And so I really think that this is a time for all of us to rejoice that this is, for the General Plan Committee, we've concluded our work.
Mr. Chairman? Sure. Marion, I'd like to express my personal thanks for the hard work that you and Terry did leading the General Plan Committee, and also George, who was on it from the very beginning. I joined you a little late when I replaced Councilman Hanna, but I understand we have our unofficial member of the committee sitting behind us up there who went to every single meeting and was aware of the discussions that were made, where adverbs or adjectives and commas and dots and so forth were considered in writing. Almost every line of the general plan had a tremendous discussions during that 3-year period that you did it, and all of you need to be commended by not only this body but the council for a job well done.
Thank you. And I need to commend Daniel as well, Daniel for sticking with us, and Elizabeth also for helping us to put
Elizabeth, I'm sorry I didn't see you sitting behind Mr. Lamerson's big broad shoulders.
For Elizabeth, who has also helped us to dot every I, put every comma in correctly so that we became a committee that looked very literate. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Elizabeth Ruffner, former member of the committee, which has been dismissed, now a member of the public.
Right.
And I'm demanding of you, men, that you set up a procedure for how you're going to handle this material. We've talked a lot, you've talked a lot, we've written material, the public has presented material, and as we call the Bell document and the Catan documents, the committee has seen them and passed on to you, the responsibility of either putting what you wish to see changed in writing and passed on to staff and order staff to make the changes or continue to ignore them. And that's a very serious charge I'm making to you. I don't expect you to go back over the plan the committee submitted to you, because we did that, as you've heard repeatedly. But we have material today from Game and Fish, repeatedly, not from Paul Catan yet, but we did not consider in the committee seriously enough his recommendation on health concerns, which should be a part of this city's responsibility. And also the work Mrs. Bell did based on work we did together of a number of substantive additions to this plan. I believe you have the authority to order the staff to include this material or leave it out, but you have to take a formal action, and it has to be in writing. And then I reserve the time, if I may speak a second time, I have some enlargement for you on telecommuting, which I didn't have at the time we discussed it with the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, the last time we met, I think we spent quite a bit of time, or it might have been the time before that, trying to determine a path to completion of this review, okay? We certainly, our job's to review it, okay? Originally, I thought that review would be put in writing and go back to the committee, but that's no longer going to happen. So yes, I'm definitely trying to focus this down into specific written issues, to recommendations to go to the staff to do what they need to do. So that's why I was from here to the end of this thing, I need to try to establish consensus. I thought maybe I could do it in a more appropriate manner with a small group, ad hoc committee, something. I was told I can't do that. I was told I have to do it in front, right here, in the public hearing. Okay, that makes it a lot harder, as you know. So that's kind of what my goal is to get to those specific focus items and try to distill them down so we have a consensus, so I have something in writing to give staff. And just as Lindsay was able to give them something in writing to consider. And Lindsay.
Hello again. Lindsay
Hello.
Bell, 368 Dogwood, here in Prescott. I also want to commend the work of the committee. I know that the volume of my comments and the depth and breadth of them has caused some committee members to believe that I was criticizing their work. That was never my intent, and I didn't do that. The work that I did in response to my friend Elizabeth's request was to review the document for internal consistency, making sure that if there's a value stated in the vision section, that there are narrative goals and strategies that carry that forward, that respond to it, and that within the body of the entire document, that there are no glaring omissions of issues that have come up in the community. And we've talked about those. You mentioned the recovery house things. I had earlier brought up the fact that the city is now an entitlement community for community development block grants, and that is different from the plan 10 years ago. And that imposes some obligations as well as some opportunities that I think ought to be embodied in particularly the housing sections of the plan. And then the third major missing piece that I saw was transportation planning, which was left out, and the community continues to be concerned about transportation planning, traffic management, et cetera. So I thought that definitely needed to be in there. I also looked at the document in terms of again, an aspect of internal consistency, that if there was a goal or strategy, was that supported by the narrative? Was there documentation that would logically lead you to that conclusion or to that strategy? So that's what the bulk of my comments have been, in an attempt to enhance the plan, not to criticize the work that was done, but to build on the work that was done so that we can take a viable product to the voters, because this plan ultimately has to be ratified by the voters. Elizabeth also asked me along the way to submit actual language, and I've done that, put it in writing, submitted actual language for my suggestions. Much of that language actually came out of the 2003 plan. There's very little of what I have submitted in suggested additions to the 2013 general plan that is radically different from what was in the 2003 plan. Some updates, given some of the changes in the last 10 years in issues before the community. But it isn't a lot of changes. So I, too, commend the committee for their work, and hopefully with my comments and suggestions that I brought forward in the public hearing and speaking before Planning and Zoning, those will serve to enhance the plan as we move forward. Last time around, we did isolate about 8 different policy items that need to be reviewed, and you've mentioned a couple of those. I'm anxious that we have some closure on that stuff, and I'm also interested in, I don't advocate for a line by line, but maybe a concept by concept discussion of the suggestions I've made in terms of like combining chapters 3 and 4 into one chapter, which I was trying to respond to the committee's concerns in that regard. But I'd like to have some feedback or information about how the committee is going to incorporate or not incorporate, if that's the decision, along the lines of what Elizabeth just suggested. How do we go forward and dispose of these comments, my comments, Paul Caton's comments, Game and Fish, and some of the other input that came in through the hearing process this spring? We have a process to do that, to definitively say,
this goes in, this doesn't, and here's how we move forward to the council and to ultimately to the voters to ratify it.
No, that's what I was trying to achieve, some kind of a method to do that. And I was kind of shot down when I suggested like an ad hoc committee of 2 or 3 people who could sit down and get something done. So
Well, as I said before, I stand ready and willing to assist in whatever process and volunteer my time under the supervision and direction of city staff to move this process forward. And they haven't called me either.
well, we have, yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
But I'm certainly willing to do that,
Okay.
and I'm more than happy to answer any questions any of you have regarding the comments that you have hopefully now had a chance to review and think about. So
Right, and
I'm at your disposal.
And we're trying, like I said, I'm trying to get it distilled down to certain consensus of commissioners. Maybe we have to do a little more homework, folks, but as it stands right now, Lindsay, I've read everything you've done. I'm not line item by line item, because I'm not even looking at the general plan line item on line item. I don't think we can. I don't think we need to. But I've distilled it down to about 9 or 10 items, and about half of them overlap yours.
Okay.
So, I've distilled it into transportation and rehab homes, and I mean, about 6 or 7 of them overlap. So we are looking at it. We probably need to keep talking about it, but I pretty much have your thoughts and your ideas.
Okay.
And,
Thank you.
okay.
Mr.
Len?
Chairman?
Yeah, I'm going to let our former chairman of the the general plan speak before me.
Uh, Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank Lindsay for all your efforts. I read through all your changes, and I really appreciate it, the work that you and Elizabeth did. Now I think we're going to have to determine what the process is to either incorporate or leave out or some way address the items that the other commissioners have brought up. I know George and I, we spent countless hours in that, so I don't know if you brought up any additional items.
Well,
I did not submit anything.
No, I didn't submit it again. I had my opportunity while I was on the committee, I had all the opportunity I needed and twice as much extra to bring any thoughts I had forward. But I had gone through all of Lindsay's comments and created a list of red lines and things that I'd say incorporate as written, or this tends to be redundant with what's in here, even though it's written better. I wouldn't say to replace what, you remember the general plan committee, they did paragraph by paragraph, then at the end of each section they went through and reviewed it again, and then by consensus agreed on it, and then we did about 2 additional full reviews after we were done with all the sections, going through the whole plan from cover to cover, and kind of hit on the continuity and things there. So, if it might look like a camel, a horse invented by a committee in some places, but it was done through a certain process in public, and so in a lot of cases, like in terms of combining 2 sections together or something, that might have been fine if we would have done that, but we didn't. And so, the general recommendation is there's reasons why those 2 are separate, and so the recommendation be leave it alone. But I pretty much have all of her items redlined or something that could be given to staff and put in, so we could come back with an edited document with her additions, Paul Caton's additions in red or something in there, and then see, do you agree with this or not at the commission level, or do we need to really rethink and add back in? I found that not everybody always agrees with me, so and that's just fine. So But anyway, we could do that in terms of getting the reviews that I had done into the plan in the staff, and then bring it back. But again, I guess Terry and I are in a different position because we had been in those discussions.
Right, and I have too. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make another comment. It's up to you commissioners, to order some work done by the staff. Lindsay has offered to sit with their direction and enter stuff into the computer, which they hadn't had the time to do. But they will do it when the commission orders them to produce a document for you for the October public hearing, when you will adopt a plan to recommend to the council for adoption. As I understand it, there will be public hearings when the council receives the plan.
As we understand, council's intention is to have a series of public meetings. They probably won't be formal hearings until it comes to the adoption, but they would be a series of public meetings.
But let's say that, for instance, Game and Fish came to the September meeting. I've been coming with Lindsay since April with new ideas for better general plan final document. No one has, beyond what the committee did, stepped into the next pattern, which is up to you, to take in writing what has been submitted, order the staff to prepare a document for you, which will be the final work of this fine committee. I'm really pleased with the chairman's work and everybody else's work. But this is the public comment time. This is the important time for you to hear from people the committee didn't hear from or who have just wakened up. And I have another comment, which I will give you now or later as you choose, on telecommuting, because I didn't have the appropriate backup from a person who can't be here today, but who, when I get his approval of the written paraphrasing I've done with some of his comments about his background and what he's doing in consulting with Bend, Oregon, I want you to think about another stronger area on telecommuting, because I believe it's the future of our community as well as the world. If I may speak again on that, I will, but meanwhile, I simply am going to give all of you a copy of a newspaper article about, we all know what telecommuting is and who does it, but we really don't know what it means, and it's fast on the rise. And if this town is only retirement people and only based on market-driven construction, we're in deep trouble. We have a future to plan, and that's what we've been trying to do for the last 10 years. I had trouble getting the word telecommuting into the plan, but now I'm going to have some more material for you, and I'm hopeful that by the October meeting, you will have reviewed some of this material and resolved that you will add more context to the economic development section to include more future statements about what this community can achieve in telecommuting. And I recommend to you the City of Bend, Oregon, which is online, and it is a website I will give you. I will give it to the staff.
Okay.
I mean, what you're doing right here is kind of what we had our first session this morning, and that is recognizing a demand out there. We got the Verizon Tower in Prescott Lakes, and you've got those that are opposed to looking over at some little tower over here versus those that are making their livelihood or have health and safety issues by having that improved communications. But it's really up to the, Verizon investing in what is going to be a growing market and doing that. It's not something the city's not going to come in and put in a cell tower or fiber optics or something. We need to work with it, as we did today, cooperatively with those that are willing to invest in the resources in order to bring this about. And I don't know if there's anything more that you could think the city can do in that role other than cooperating with free enterprise on this. You've got the public, the residents of here that are going to be moving here, and you've got private enterprise that's going to make the investments. And as long as that gets communicated and we're receptive as a body, then.
But we have to, in the general plan for the next 10 years of this community, enunciate the citizens' desire for additional technology. And I would refer you to bendfortech.com. All 3 E's, BENDFORTEC.com, 2 E's. And then well into the October meeting, I'll give the chairman, before the October meeting, I'll give the chairman maybe a couple of paragraphs enlarging on the word, which I recommend to you to approve. And then, as you've just described, George, the future is in the desire of the private sector to invest. But if we have proof, as we do with our higher educational institutions, the need is here. The desire to relocate in this town and raise their families is here. But it's impossible with our current state of technology. And that's what we, as citizens, need to project. Thank you. I'm finished for today, and thanks for all your hard work.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify a point with Ms. Ruffner, and maybe I misunderstood Ms. Ruffner.
It's right over my head.
Thank you. Yeah, and correct me, of course, if I'm wrong, but did I understand you to say that you wanted the commission to order the city to accept additional language and additional ideas from
the public,
yourself, and from the public? But I think I also understood you to say that the committee has been disbanded. The committee who developed the general plan has been disbanded now. It's no longer sitting. Is that right, or I'm wrong?
Right. No, we finished our work.
No, you finished your work. So
no, we're not disbanded. We're not disbanded.
There was no formal disbandment, but
that's
the
not
committee
the question.
finished its
question is,
issue.
has the committee finished its work? Yes.
Okay.
Well, no, because we're still doing the advocacy.
We have the chairman, the co-chairman, and one of the members, and now a member of the public, and others wishing still to influence the outcome.
I totally understand, and that's why you're here today. But it seemed to me you were, if I understood you correctly, you were asking the committee to direct that the city accept these recommendations and rework some of the language in the general plan.
Yes.
And if the committee is no longer sitting, then it's just individual folks who are.
It's up to the commission.
Asking to.
No, she was directing the commission.
It's not up to individuals.
Yes, you were asking the commission to do that.
I'm asking the commission to take official action on the recommendations made since the committee said its work was done, because you have that authority and responsibility.
I understand. And what I thought you were saying, though, is you wanted to have Miss Bell sit down and work with the.
She's offered to be staff for the city as a volunteer because they don't have enough employees.
All right, that's a different topic.
That's what's been a big problem, I think.
I guess my concern is having private citizens working directly with the city, suggesting language and changes without.
We have thousands of volunteers in this city. Mm-hmm. You couldn't open the doors of the police department if you didn't have volunteers.
My concern is with having private members of the community not going through the committee that drafted the general plan having the commission order that the city accept this language and negotiate with these individuals about language that's going to end up in the general plan.
Until it's in a document, Mr. Springer, no one has really looked at it as the general plan. All I'm suggesting is that you receive additional material from the public, accept the offer of the public volunteer to put material into a computer so that you could have the addition this commission would like to study before they pass it on to the council. No intrusion of private privileges or public anything else, but an offer of a volunteer where there has been lack of staff. For instance, last meeting of this public hearing of this Planning and Zoning Commission, has reflected in no documental additions, corrections, anything. Tom has written a lot of words. Mr. Scamardo's written a lot of words. If you are going to order some additions to the document you have before you in the form of a lot of pieces of paper, and also recommendations from Game and Fish and another member of the public, now that the committee's work is done, it really is your responsibility to receive that material.
Well, I would agree that it's the responsibility of the commission to look at that material, but I thought, and perhaps I misunderstood, you were suggesting that members of the public like yourself and Ms. Bell, that the commission order the city to sit down with you and go over this language and accept some of this language without going through the commission.
No.
All right. Well, thank you for that clarification.
The committee has reviewed at least what I'm calling the Bell material since April. And then they concluded their work in August. Nothing has been done of a definitive nature. We started with the committee on this review of these recommendations to tighten up, make more clear, create better wording and better understood language to the public. George has some comments as well in writing. That material has never been collected in one form in the document you are supposed to be recommending to the city council. Wouldn't you like to see it all in one place? That's what I'm suggesting.
All right. In other words, you're just suggesting that somebody sit down and type all this in one document. Is that all you're suggesting?
Yes, the staff has not had time to do that. The staff is nodding yes. They haven't had time to do that.
And you're suggesting there are volunteers available to do this.
We have an offer of volunteers to assist. And the staff would supervise if that were required, if that were ordered by this commission. No one else has that authority at the moment. The committee has finished its work. You now have the project.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
never mind.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, we were asked to review this document and comment, and my assumption from day one was that our comments would go back to the committee to be reviewed and decide whether or not they want to incorporate them or not. But now that whole scenario is sidetracked. And so, and I don't want to be presumptuous enough to say, okay, here's changes to the general plan. Go ahead and make them, staff, because we're almost at that point.
You can do that.
I know
is
it,
actually
but I
what
don't
we
think that's
expect
the
of
way the process should be worked.
The process has been and always has been, the committee drafts a plan, presents it to the planning commission, the
Right.
planning commission edits, modifies, whatever
Right.
you want to do, you pass it on to the city council. It's
Well,
never been, and it's never involved.
I always felt that the proper procedure would be to go back to the committee and let them make the final decisions because they wrote the document. And I don't want to presume
It's not a
to make
presumption.
changes.
It's important to understand it's not a presumption. The state law says you are the planning agency, not the committee. So it's not a presumption for you to make changes to it. It's expected of you to make changes.
I understand, but I think from day one the proper procedure would have been to validate the committee's work and go back to them with our comments and let them make the final decision for the final document for us to say, yes, here it is, City Council.
I understand.
But
And why can't we do that?
Well, because that whole scenario has been changed. It's been sidetracked.
That is,
The committee said they're disbanded.
we have not disbanded. Hold on, Daniel, you're not up.
I mean, I'll sit here and make changes to the plan if you like. And here they are, staff. Go ahead and make them. I don't think that's appropriate.
We spent 3 years with this general plan. We labored for 3 years.
I
Now,
understand.
there is a process that other communities have instituted very successfully. I witnessed it, George witnessed it, so did Elizabeth, where we did our job, and then it goes to you by law. My request is that through George, he stand there and represent each particular area, not each line by line, but that you do your homework, read those specific areas. For instance, the first two
chapters or the first 2 articles come back to this meeting and the public be informed that those are the 2 areas that are going to be discussed only, and you approve those areas or not approve and make changes. I am not coming back for another 3 years because you think we need to. That's unfair and it's unjust. I
don't think you need to.
No,
I'm
but
just saying.
what I'm saying to you is that I am requesting that you do what other communities do. You take each section or 2 sections at a time. George stands there and you say, I don't like the way this is worded, I'd like to see changes, and you approve or disapprove it, and then you move on. Otherwise, we're going to be another 3 years when other communities have done this in 2 years totally. So again, I am requesting that through George, you come back for the first 2 chapters or areas, approve them, and then the next time approve the next 2, and you're done with those. They're gone. The public has the right to stand there and say, well, I'd like to see this, and you approve that or don't approve it. But in the last hour, nothing has been approved. Nothing has been discussed and said, okay, I approve that. So are we going to do this for the next 3 years? Please don't do this.
I hope
would insult the 3 years that we just spent.
George, excuse me.
Gary,
I'm sorry. I don't think we're looking for delay in this. What we've got is a consensus from the committee, the General Plan Committee, and not everyone on the General Plan Committee agreed with everyone in order for that consensus. But the majority of the members agreed to pass it on up to P&Z. We were fortunate having 2 members on the P&Z Commission who also stated that they were satisfied with the plan, and it was a consensus. Again, that word comes up. It wasn't 100% of everyone, but there were dissenters, but the consensus of the General Plan Committee was to pass it up to P&Z. The consensus here, if I'm reading David Springer right and George and Terry right, is that we've got a consensus on the P&Z to move it on up to the council to get it to go before the voters, and the voters have got the final say. They either approve the plan or they turn it down. And they got to start at game 1. But to sit here and say, I would like these changes because Len Scamardo did not like the language that was in Section 5 when they were writing it, and here's my changes, I think that's wrong. So my opinion is we had a commission, we had a board, they spent 3 years, there was a consensus moving it up to us, and my opinion right now is we're ready to move it by consensus of a vote, the majority to send it up to the council.
Well, can I just say, Lynn, that I'm getting the sense now that we have a general plan that's been submitted, and now we have folks, some of whom were on the general plan committee, who are asking for substantive additions and modifications to the plan. So I don't think we've got a complete plan. I think that I don't think it's the job of the commission to kind of micromanage this process and go through these proposed revisions ourselves. I think that if these things have merit, they should go back to the, with our comments, go back to the general plan, let them have another meeting or 2, and if they think it's appropriate to add this stuff to the general plan, fine, but I don't think that that's something that we can do very effectively here in an open meeting like this.
David, I agree with you 100%. That's what I've been saying from day one.
I agree with
said
you.
All of a sudden we've become the final editors, and that's not what we should be.
Well, you know, in Prescott Valley, you know, Gary and Elizabeth, we went and there was no committee. It was staff. They, working with planning and zoning, staff would create the document. There was not without any input from public special interest groups and things to staff. You know, they had their feels out, but then they would bring chapter by chapter to planning and zoning and discuss, here's what we're recommending, and it would be approved on that night on the in one, you know, thing. And you know, there wasn't this committee of 11 plus 2 plus all this kind of thing going through areas that collectively they were not all up to date or have expertise individually on. You know, so there, you know, the need of a committee is strictly something which council, you know, did, and it's somewhat of been done previously with the city of Prescott. But again, you're trying to get the best input, the widest input that you can, and then take it to the public. And, so, the reliance on the committee is a little bit more of a crutch than I think we should have. I think P&Z needs to take accountability by the state statute. It's our role, and we need to do our work and get on with it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Number one, thanks for wrestling with this issue. I appreciate Trevor being here. Many times as one councilman, I have made the statement we want to be the best at what we can be. Last meeting that we addressed this issue, I addressed this body, and I ask you to please pay particular attention to certain things. Acknowledging, for example, we have a limited use of water in the portfolio. I appreciated today your action of changing some zoning, which now opens up a door of opportunity for a landowner to develop some properties that may address an ever-changing demographic in the city. The fact that 70% of all single-family dwelling units in the city of Prescott are now occupied by less than 2 people indicates that Prescott is different than it was 10 years ago. It also indicates there may be some needs to some of the issues in the general plan that need a little bit of tweaking. And some of those, for example, we are trying to work with Fish and Game on some issues. I do appreciate the comments you made, Mr. Menser, with regards to adding some stronger language with the parks and lakes and the development and the working with the various different state or federal agencies with regards to not only the water quality but the land use of the properties that the city has investment in. That would, fact of the matter is, I know from past history that Fish and Game generates some $75 to $80 million worth of revenue in Yavapai County. That's a huge industry. Of course, we've got other industries that have now transpired over the last 10 years. One of them has to do with alcoholism and drug abuse. All right, that has a significant impact on the quality of life issues and the land use issues in the city of Prescott. It's planning and zoning that we're looking to see if there's elements that when this comes forward that we can be confident that this has been vetted out as best as we can vet it out. And that's working with the legal department, that's working with planning and zoning for land use issues. There's different things that have changed in the city of Prescott, and we're going to have to depend on some of the assets that we have. And some of the assets we have include ecotourism. People come here from outside the community, they spend money here, they leave money here, and that's going to be the revenue that we're going to be dependent on for a long time. Some of the things that we're trying to do out at the airport, for example, with land use, have to do with industrial development and in avionics and in high tech and things like that. So what I would be looking for is one councilman, not as a council, but as one councilman coming out of planning and zoning when I'm sitting there, you guys went through this, you vetted it out, you saw what was there. From a land use perspective, maybe we need more property that's zoned in this manner or this manner to handle the service industry, because now we're an elderly community, more so than we were before. So we need adequate, affordable housing for people that are going to service not only in the restaurants but in the medical industry for technicians, etc. Well, the actions we took today, opening up that part of the Lee's property to be developed for multifamily, which may encourage a development that would be suitable for housing, for the economic capability that the city generates right now to service, from a basic service need, these people. So I'm not looking for you guys to rewrite the plan. I'm looking for you to go through the plan and tweak the plan where you see from a land use thing it could be different than maybe what it's being recommended. Then you guys are going to make the recommendation to us. The committee worked real hard for 3 years, What they did is there is a process, and that process is that the public sits down and drafts a document, a proposed document that then gets vetted out through organizations such as, I had hoped the chamber had taken a look. I had hoped the real estate people had taken a look. I had hoped the school systems had taken a look to make sure that what needed to be in the plan is there, okay, especially from a land use perspective. So if you guys will do that and then forward it to the council's on a timeline too. We plan on having some sort of action on a general plan within the scope of what we're mandated to by state law. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
And Jim, we're trying to get there.
I understand.
You know?
I understand, but we're not going to do it arguing. What we're going to do is we're going to read it. We're going to say, hey, I really think as individual commissioners, just like you just did, Tom, I think we need a little stronger language on how we use the lakes, how we employ the lakes, how we work with federal and state agencies to get a higher and best use of those lakes. You know, there's certain things we're going to have to do with these things, and we'll work through that. But a general plan is just that. It's general. It's not specific.
Yeah,
it's general. We want to maximize our ecotourism opportunities, which include the lakes, include the fisheries, include the, we're not going to hunt in the city anymore, but, you know, it includes certain things. So if you guys can get to that point and forward it to the council, because we're going to go through this all over again.
Well, that's why we don't want to give you the general plan as it is in its present form with a whole stack of suggestions and changes. That's not going to do you any good. You need a final document. So we have to figure out how to get from here
I appreciate
to the final document.
Your comments, but if you would, for example, on the one area that you were concerned with the lakes, include that, send that part to the council. If you have some interest in public transportation,
yeah, well,
the part as it's been delivered. I've read that general plan through and through and through, and I'm ready to receive the general plan and make my comments when it comes forward, because I'll guarantee you I've got some. And you guys aren't going to fix it.
Okay.
It's going to come forward to us, and then we'll be the final say.
I just felt it was presumptuous on our part to make changes to the work of the committee without the committee being able to review it before it's put in a final form. I have a problem with that.
Tom, I agree with you on that. And I think that what we should do is we should have a dedicated session where we're just focusing on nothing but the general plan sometime in October, and hash all this out, and then send it back to if it's appropriate, send it back to the committee for their review and input, and then it can come forward as a final version, and that can go to council.
Mr. Chairman, before we move on to any other additional public comments, there are a couple of things that have come up in discussion that can be addressed slightly differently. One of the things that we were expecting from the commissioners this time around, as was directed by you, was for them to bring you a list of bullet points or talking points or issues that they wanted to specifically discuss. Those things can be provided to staff, and we can provide you with a comprehensive document that says, here's all of our talking points. Here are the things that need to be addressed. You have the ability to invite committee members to all of your meetings. You have 2 automatics here. You have a number of others who have taken their personal time to be here to provide you input, to participate in your discussion, not necessarily have you formally reconvene them, but they participate in your discussion. You're not imposing on them, you're asking them for their input. You're saying, I don't like the way this is worded, here's why I think it should be changed, what do you think? And they're here to provide that input to you. That's why they're invited to the meeting. That's why Daniel's here with his length of time with the committee. That's why George and Terry are here to answer those questions as either a committee member or a member of the Planning Commission. You have the ability to do that. What you need to kick it off is a list of things you want to talk about. Now, you have written comments from Lindsay. Those written comments can either be inserted into the plan and redlined so that you know where her comments are, either by city staff or volunteer. We need a list of things that you want to talk about. The alternative is to start with Chapter 1, and I think Gary mentioned this. You can start by saying, okay, we're going to have 5 meetings over 5 weeks, and we're going to talk about 2 elements in each meeting, and at the end of that, we're going to move the whole plan onto the City Council. You can do it that way. So you have a number of opportunities, but I think we need to pick one to be the focal point or the direction that we move forward with it. Reconvening the committee is possible, although I think having them show up and put in the time that you would want them to put in to re-review the entire plan, because you may make changes to every single section of it, may be asking an awful lot of them. They were volunteers and they spent 3 years working on this. They're ready and have handed the baton off with the willingness to participate in the discussions throughout the rest of this process. Not just here, they'll be at the City Council meetings for their discussion as well. They want to participate, but it's your document to work with right now. And if you have to set a means of stepping forward, and it's either provide staff with a list of bullet points or start talking about section by section.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. George, will these be more like work study sessions for the P&Z rather as open forum like we're doing today in a formal?
All of your meetings are open to the public. They are not all public hearings. It is within the chair's ability to say, we're going to talk about this and we will open it to public comment for a very short period of time, or we're not going to take public comment. We're here to review what we've already received at the last meeting. Now, I would suspect that it's best if we have periodic public comment opportunities so that you continue to receive public comment, but you don't have to have every single meeting a public hearing.
That was my question.
And one other point, there was discussion early on about having subcommittee work on this. Subcommittees are a possibility. They are public meetings and have to be held in a public session and they have to be noticed, but you can have a subcommittee. What you were told before was that you can't have a committee meeting without inviting the public to it. That you can't do. Even all the general plan committee meetings, the public was invited.
So it'd be more like the general plan committee meetings that we held
over
the last 3 years.
That way, or it could be held in here in a more formal setting. It's possible. I think you've reached the point where you have to pick a route to get to the end. And there are 3 ways to get there, it seems like. Turn the thing back to the committee with your comments. That means we need your comments to turn them back to the committee. So we have to get comments from this body somehow. Make your comments and suggestions with the cooperation of the committee members who are coming to these meetings. That's the second possibility. And the third is to have staff write the plan up, mark the changes that you want changed, and then you re-review it again. There are a number of different ways to do this, but we have to pick one.
Right. But, the thought of this committee out there, the committee is pretty much evaporated in terms of having a quorum. If we could get 4 or 5 at a meeting now, it's, less, fewer than the 11 that we started out with. And it's not even turned into a representative public forum anymore, the committee. That's a bit of a problem. So there's a lot of objection by those that from the committee that could attend the meeting, that they're just done with it. They put their time in, and unfortunately they are not willing to put in additional time. So that's an issue that we would have to work through, because it's going to be just probably the subset of the folks that's here plus Miriam, maybe the 5 of us, and that's about all that's left that's going to participate in some way.
But we have seen that participation at these 2 meetings, this one and your last meeting. So the committee members who are still actively desiring to participate will be here, are here, and will be here for council when it goes to council.
Question for our attorney. John, welcome back. Would it be appropriate for the P&Z to have a motion presented to accept the plan as submitted by the General Plan Committee and forward it on up to? And if it comes up for a vote and it's positive, we take the plan and send it to council. If the vote is a no pass, then we can look at alternatives in order to bring it back and get a decision at some time in the future. Are we at that point that someone could make a motion to approve the plan?
No, well, there's two pieces to that. One is you do need, I think, one more public hearing, because again, just to reemphasize, the general plan committee is not a statutory committee. It's really sort of a extra step. And I think Commissioner Steach, somebody mentioned that many other cities simply have staff and community meetings with drafts of the various chapters or elements. And then the Planning Commission is the planning body that's charged with finalizing the draft general plan and sending it forward to the council, who then finalizes its version of the general plan and sends it forward to the voters. So, you know, in this situation, from the committee's work to the voters, the plan could be fundamentally different. You're not bound by anything the committee does. The committee is merely a recommending body or a starting point to this body, which is a recommending point to the council. The only time you really have an up or down vote is you know, November 2015 or whenever the vote occurs. It's up or down. It's not conditional. So after one more public hearing, which is required by law by the planning body, this commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission, could simply vote to adopt the committee, the General Plan Committee's final draft in its form without any changes at all. You certainly have that. You have that discretion.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know. It's getting so darn hard for the commissions to interject their comments and their remarks and their feelings on the general plan. It may come down to that. Just forget it. Just to vote for it. Just get rid of it. I mean, come on, guys. We're supposed to be doing our job here. We're supposed to be reviewing this. But on the other hand, I have to respect the committee's work by letting them review anything we decide to change. I just think they should.
You know, let me also throw in one other element, and I think it was mentioned that if you have a subcommittee that was appointed, or committee that was appointed by the council, the General Plan Committee, and it has 11 designated members. If you don't have at least 6 show up, you don't have a quorum. That committee can't take any action. So your challenge is going to be, if you do it in that method and you send it back and only 5 persons of that committee show up without any other formal council action of sort of appointing substitute persons, it's dead. I mean, you're dead. You can't. That committee can't take any action. Can't even really have the meeting, because that committee is subject to open meeting law just like every other committee. So the problem with that method is that unless you have an assurance that you're going to have 6 official members of that committee show up and take an action, we do have the obligation to send to the voters the general plan not later than 2015. So we've got a couple of consolidated election dates coming up. One, the August primary, or 2, the November general election, where it could go on the ballot. Otherwise, it would have to be a special election, and there's costs and all involved. So that is a potential problem. Again, to reemphasize what Mr. Worley said, as a matter of law, this is the body that makes that finalizes the general plan, send it to the city council. You have no, and I understand there's a difference between sort of legal and whatever other obligation or honor or honoring what the committee did, but you have no legal obligation to do it at all. In other words, what comes out of this commission could be completely different, 180 degrees from what the committee did, from a legal standpoint. You're not bound by anything that the committee did. If you like what they did, great. If you don't, if you want to change, and again, meaning a majority, if it's a 4-3 vote to change some wording in an element, and that's, I think, one of the recommendations is go through, vote, and you can vote element by element or chapter by chapter of its final form as you go through, this, rather than you don't have to vote on it all at once. In other words, your votes could be piecemeal, because there's going to be agreements and disagreements, and you can get through it that way. But I think
I think we're going to have to do it element by element. It's sounding
there
like-
is, as odd as it sounds, the end of 2015 is fast approaching because this has to go through the council in the same method. And there's a lot of meetings that the council's going to have to do essentially an element by element review as well. So
Yeah.
even though there's a year and a half or a little less than a year and a half to the end of 2015, that's not a lot of time for everybody to get through it.
One other comment. and
Sounds
Jo-
like we're going to have to take more time than we thought.
One other comment. George, again, correct me if I'm wrong. When the general plan was working on a final version of the plan, they sent it to a variety of staff, different departments, and outside interest or special interest for their comments before they voted the consensus to forward it on up. Those staff reviews were incorporated. Some of the changes in language and changes were incorporated in the final draft, some were not. But all of the staff and the various departments had an opportunity to comment on the draft of the general plan. And then those drafts were reviewed by the committee, and either some of them accepted, some of them not accepted. But the final result was is that after getting staff review and some of the other interest groups review, there was another review, and that was the one that was approved under a consensus of sending it on up to P&Z. And I can accept what we're talking about at the present time, that if we try to do it with the whole 12 elements, we're going to be spinning around for who knows. On the other hand, if we're able to break it into sections and say we're going to have element 1, 2, and 3, and we make a decision, and we know we're out of that one, and then go to 4, 5, and 6, and so forth within the next couple of months.
It's so difficult to try to editorialize this thing.
Yes.
In a public forum like this. My God, you know, I said that weeks ago. I said, I don't know how you're going to do it. And that's why I was trying to say, could we just form a 3-man committee and hammer it out? And then let the commission vote on it. But, you know.
Well, again, you can do the committee. They have to be open to the public.
Okay.
Open meeting law would apply to a subcommittee. Your subcommittee can't be a quorum of the commission, so 3 members would be the most. 4 members, 3 members. Quorum is 4.
And invite the public, but we could say no public comment?
Yeah. You're not, the planning commission is obligated to have 2 public hearings.
Right, and we've already
on the
done that.
general plan. 2, right?
Well, we didn't close the last one.
We didn't close.
Okay, well, a subcommittee formed doesn't have to have a public hearing. It is a public meeting, subject to open meetings law, has to be agendized. You can only talk about what's, in other words, let's say you agendize chapters 1, 2, and 3. That's what you're limited to talk to, chapters 1, 2, and 3. You can't get into 4 in that particular meeting. So certainly it is a public hearing. It is a public meeting. It's not necessarily a public hearing. You can choose to take comment or not at that. They're very limited, generally speaking. Public meetings are very rarely required to be public hearings, except in specific instances.
So I could
like
set it
zoning
up with
decisions.
3 members of the commission, make it a public hearing with a public
meeting.
Public meeting
meeting.
where the public isn't comment.
Right.
And we could sit down and hammer this thing out.
Right. It's done in public.
In public.
Agendized
Well, that's the
properly.
only way it's going to work.
It could be done here.
It's
It can
the
be
only way
done, we
it's
can
gonna
set
work.
it up in the basement if we have availability of other meeting rooms. We have other alternative meeting rooms.
Which I'd rather do it in a different format, a different forum. I'd rather do it a round table sort of thing. Okay, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're not, I know we're spinning our wheels here today.
Can I make my comments?
You're standing there.
Well,
I haven't forgotten you.
Okay.
Okay, let me finish my thought. I'll sit down with staff and we'll organize that kind of a situation, because I think that's the only way we're going to be able to conclude this thing, and maybe have figured 2 or 3 of those meetings, and then maybe you guys edit a final document for all the commissioners to review.
I We can do that,
Would that
certainly.
work?
I think it's important to know what you want to talk about. Do we do them by elements? Do we have meetings by elements? You're going to
I'll
review
sit down
3 or
with
4.
staff and we'll make a decision on the what we're going to try to cover in those meetings, okay? And then you guys handle the paperwork.
Well, I think that whatever sort of agreement that you come up with, staff needs to come back to the commission, and then it needs to be formally, the process needs to be then formally adopted by the commission, and the appointment of no more than 3 members from the commission to the subcommittee needs to be done by way of a vote and all that. So,
it does.
So between now and your next meeting.
Can we do
Or
that now?
you can do it
We
today. You can do it
right now,
We can direct the
sure,
chairman to appoint a 3-member committee to,
Right.
Mr. Chairman, why does it need to be limited to a 3-member committee? Why can't we allow all commission members to participate in this discussion?
Then it's a planning
enough-
commission meeting.
Then it's a planning commission meeting, and it has to, but it doesn't have to be open to the public. It can still be,
No, it has to be open to the
all the meetings are open to the public.
It's not a public
Whether it's a
hearing.
3-member meeting or whether it's a full commission.
If you want the full commission to have additional meetings, you can have special meetings. We can call a special meeting, set it up, have you guys meet. I think the issue that Mr. Menser has is, well, I think the issue you seem to have is that with 7 of you here, plus the public input, it can be a bit cumbersome to have all of the input occur, as opposed to a 3-member committee, which is much more contained, if nothing else, in order to limit the focus and limit the discussion, rather than have 7 of you.
Well, the difficulty with that is that some of the commission members are more interested in some aspects of the general
Exactly.
plan than others. So all the commission members, in my view, should have an opportunity to participate to the extent that they wish to participate. And as long as it is a meeting that is where we're not taking comments from the public, they can come and sit and listen, but as long as we're not interrupting the meeting or interrupting our train of thought or going off on a tangent by addressing comments made by the public, we're going to be sufficiently focused.
Okay, can we set that up now?
You can do that, but again, a caution, and I'm sorry if I'm stepping on the attorney's toes, but if you set up a meeting of the Planning Commission, you have to have a quorum. If you set up a meeting of a subcommittee, you can't have a quorum.
Right.
So if you set up a subcommittee of 3 members and the 4th one of you shows up, meeting's over.
Yeah, well, I mean, to your point, though, the overall commission, by consent, is going to have to vote on each.
Right.
So the subcommittee is just doing a lot of the groundwork and coming forward. The fact that you identify something missing in the language or you don't like something
Would occur later.
The whole body would
Right.
be able to discuss that and still make another change.
Yeah, but then we're back in I take your point, but we're back in the problem where we're in a public meeting where we're taking comment. It's much more difficult to work.
Well, we can
and it's
have a
very
public
focused
meeting without taking
comment.
public comment, right?
Yes. You're required to have one more public hearing where you have to take public
Right.
comment, but
Could
your
we have
other
a public
meetings,
meeting in between
it's
those?
discretionary. You have the discretion to take public comment or not at a meeting. As chair, you have that discretion. If you choose the direction of a subcommittee, I would recommend one of the 2 commissioners who was on the general plan committee be appointed to it. Sorry, guys, but it's important that you have that continuity of thought and understanding.
that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm thinking, though, I'd like to have everybody's comments, though, and I'd like to do it in a format, maybe it's a public meeting, where we don't
You
take
can schedule a
comments.
workshop meeting, that's
Yeah,
fine.
essentially what you're
Call it a workshop.
Yeah,
Can we
essentially
do
what you're
that?
doing is you're having a planning commission workshop, which is, it's a special meeting workshop.
Okay.
It's not a public hearing, it's an
Okay.
open meeting. It's agendized, it's scheduled.
Okay.
And
I want to set it up right now.
And as George said, though, is if you have these, you have to have at least 4 members of the commission show in order to attend, to make sure you have a quorum, and then you just keep plowing through
Okay,
pieces.
that's what
by
we want to
pieces.
do. Public workshop, a workshop where the public's invited, but no comment.
You want to set
see
it
if
up
we
in a
can-
different forum? You want us to try to set up a different meeting
Yeah, I
room
want to
rather
do it
than
in a
here?
conference room,
Okay.
like downstairs or somewhere.
Your next regular meeting date is October 9th. We can set up a workshop for October 9th. It will not be a public hearing. We don't have time to
And then
advertise
put
for
the
such
final
anyway.
public hearing off
Well, the final,
beyond that?
final public hearing is currently scheduled for the 28th of October. So
okay.
you have time to, well, first of all, you can open it and continue it, which is what you did with the last one.
Well, we may want to have 2 or 3 workshops.
Mr. Chairman, I should inform you that I am not available on the 9th. I am out of town from the 9th
Okay.
to the 13th. Can we just put it off to the following week? Does it have to be on the 9th?
No, not really. Not a workshop.
I think we just need to check the availability of meeting rooms.
Okay.
We could certainly pick a date if
Okay.
that's for the majority.
So
Tom,
how do we
wanna,
set
do
that
you
up?
want to let me run out real quick and check dates real quick?
How do we
so
set this up so we don't have to come back and wait till the next formal
Dan.
meeting to do it?
Suzanne, the next 3 Thursdays,
Good.
we'll check the availability of the room. If
Okay.
you, I think you have to pick when you're going to hold your hearing or your public meeting.
Yeah. How do we do that?
Today, I think you need to state that.
Your public hearing?
Public date, no, the meeting.
Okay.
So if that's the case, then if you want to do that, the next step, while she's checking the availability, is how do you want to set that up? Do we want to bring in a few elements at a time and have you specifically talk about those elements? Or obviously, the last attempt to try to get a series of talking points
Well,
didn't
we
result
could-
in any talking
we could-
points.
Well, we
the
could
element-
discuss the entire plan, right, if we want?
You have to agendize it to do that.
Right.
Yes,
I mean, no, I think we ought to just be dealing with the entire plan because,
okay.
We could say that the meeting is,
I mean, we may only,
Discussion of
we
the
may
entire
only
plan.
deal with 3 or 4 sections.
we can
but-
hide that.
But I
Okay.
think it should be the whole plan.
so we're not excluding
And can we
ourselves.
just maybe set it up, try
Yes.
to do next Thursday?
We're checking on the availability of rooms. So
Okay.
Suzanne will be back in a moment with that, but
Is there something special about Thursdays?
Not
typical
really.
commission meeting
Day
day.
before Friday.
Yeah.
Special to me.
We generally try and, if we have a special meeting, to try and keep it on the same day as a
And do
regular
they have
meeting.
to be
if possible.
Dan,
Can they be at-
what do you got?
Okay. Well, I
You gonna
want
help us out here?
I would like to try.
Any weekday, anytime. That's fine.
So 3 years, 4 months, 1 week ago, I was at the first meeting, and one of the things we discussed, and I would like everyone to keep in mind, we had a consensus that the 2003 plan was too lengthy and ran into too much fluff, if you will, and we decided that we wanted to make it shorter and simpler so that it would be more likely to be used. So then we have somebody come in, okay, here's the plan as the committee put forward, and here's the additions that somebody wanted to put back in. That does not meet the intent of the committee. We wanted to make it shorter. We didn't want to add in. There's a lot of the stuff that Lindsay recommended to put back in that was purposely eliminated.
Okay.
And I think we need to keep in mind that there were reasons that we wanted to make it shorter and general instead of specific. Now, might I also add, I was at every single meeting. I paid attention to every single vote. I never once heard anybody put forward a vote to disband the committee. As far as I am aware, the committee still exists. Now, a lot of people were dropping out. Some people have formally resigned. And in fact, we were having a hard time getting a quorum a couple of times near the end. But if we get the people who don't want to be involved to formally resign, that lowers the number that we need for a quorum? Nope.
If the number of the committee was set at 11, even if you have open seats, your quorum is still 6. It would have to be reformed to a smaller number.
However, new appointments could be made.
New appointments could be made, right, but again,
Okay.
I don't think the intent is to go back, is to ping
Right.
pong this back and forth.
But-
It's to
but-
move it one left to right or right to left.
But the point of the matter is, and there was a lot of discussion since I've been to every meeting of putting me on as one of the members, and that's still open. But the point I'm getting at
Prove
is,
that
when
right now, Daniel.
I'd love to, but the point I'm getting at, I think when Elizabeth comes forward and says she's no longer a committee member, I don't think that's accurate. I think she should be viewed as a committee member still. At this point, I'm a member of the public. I'm willing to change that if the council or somebody wants to change that. But Here we have a committee member that's coming in and trying to put things in that was discussed by the committee, that in some cases was rejected by the committee, and now she's trying to say, well, now I'm a member of the public, so I'm going to put it in. I don't really think that's kosher. Lindsay has known that this is going on for 3 years, 4 months, 1 week. She didn't show up to the meetings. She instead came in at the end and goes, I've got all this stuff I want to throw in your lap right at the end. Now, sure, it's public comment time, but I think the intent of public comment is a comment here and there, not a complete, I want to combine sections, I want to rewrite this. Hey, you took this out of the 2003 plan and I want to put it back in. We discussed every single line in this plan, line by line, word for word, every comma, every period, semicolon, in great detail. There's nothing accidental about this, and I think this should be respected. I'm not saying Lindsay didn't make any good points, and in fact, I've put a couple notes in here where, yeah, that should be in. But in the most case, most of what she's got in here, the committee, for specific reasons, discussed it and decided not to include it. And I think coming around at the end and taking advantage of the fatigue of the committee to try to slip it in is not kosher. I'll use that expression. And then when it comes to one other thing that I wanted to specifically mention, recovery homes were discussed, and the committee as a whole chose not to include any significant mention of it. We wanted a general plan, and that's kind of a specific area. And even though it is something that's notable in our community, we didn't want to highlight it and encourage more recovery homes to come. But also, we had a representative from the legal department say that we would have to step very lightly on any mention of recovery homes so that we wouldn't encourage somebody to say, hey, you guys are, either somebody's going to say, well, you're encouraging more to come, and that's going to be a problem, or somebody's going to say you're trying to discriminate us, and that'll be a problem. So we kind of thought recovery homes would be a landmine. That really didn't need to be in a general plan. And again,
well, you're probably going to lose that one because that's the one issue I have a consensus of right here.
Well, I might lose it. I might lose that, and that's okay. It's your guys' job to move it forward to the next step.
Okay.
But I'm just saying, that was discussed. Now, telecommuting that Elizabeth brought up recently, we talked about a need for higher bandwidth. And that would include the ability to telecommute. Now, you start talking about telecommuting specifically, and you're no longer being in general terms. And what's the city going to do to encourage telecommuting other than what's already in the plan, encouraging the development of high bandwidth internet access?
Yeah.
So
I agree.
If I may interject,
Yeah.
Daniel, I understand you're saying that many of the comments that Ms. Is it Lindsay Bell has submitted to us were already vetted by the committee. Is that your point?
Yes.
Is that also true of the Catan comments as well? No.
Not so much. But he came right at the end. But Catan's comments, there's a couple pages, and that to me is what public comment period was all about. You're expecting somebody from the public to come in, hey, I hadn't had any involvement in this thing or anything, I've looked at it. Here's a couple pages of comments I got. No problem. That's what we expected.
I think we.
But this is crazy.
I think we could more easily review those comments too in a
study group,
in a study session, sort of a situation.
And on that first day, I made a commitment that I would come to every single meeting,
I hope
and I
you're there.
intend to follow through with
Because
that.
even if we say that it's no public comment, that doesn't mean I can't ask somebody, right?
That's true.
Yes.
So I intend to follow through with that commitment, and I'm looking forward to this being
Are these
done.
Thursdays? Okay, I got the 2nd, 9th, and the 16th.
I can do the
Now,
second.
that doesn't mean you don't have to be at every one of them, but okay.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's set it up.
But, I'd like to point out one thing, when we talked about the lakes, or we talked about the committee always coming up with taxation ideas, or revenue, or business licenses, or now the group homes, is that we wanted the plan to represent our positive vision of the community and not drag in all of the negative marketing things that we consider might restrict the ability for economic growth and restrict people wanting to come here for quality of life. And so that was really why the committee discarded a lot of detail language on things that could be read as a negative flag, which the group homes could be, as well as the lakes, the impaired lakes. We had trouble getting.
You still need to consider the residents of the city, though. What are their neighborhood goals? If I had 10 recovery houses on my lot, on my street, one of my goals for the city we got to do something about that.
Well, that's a council policy issue is kind of the way we looked at it. Yeah. It had to be addressed by staff and council, and not in support of the vision or what we don't want to have here. Sometimes by putting what you don't want here, it's going to backfire, and you're going to end up with more of it.
No, I look at it as if it's a general. If it's of general interest, it should be in that general plan. So, anyway, is this going to work with?
We can do all three of those as workshop meetings.
Okay.
You just need to tell us today that
Let's
that's what
do
you'd
it.
like to do. We will post the meetings.
It'll be the entire.
We will
commission or
agendize.
whoever shows up, right?
We'll
As long as
you need a quorum.
As long as we have a quorum.
You need a quorum.
So we need to verify the quorum before each meeting, if possible. Make a few calls.
We will poll all of you to make sure you can make all of those meetings.
Okay. How do we set this up then officially?
You just need to tell us that you want to schedule 3 workshop meetings.
Do we need to vote on this?
Nope.
No. Okay, we're going to set up workshops the 2nd, 9th, and 16th.
Do they have to be at 9 o'clock? Do we have
They need to be morning meetings.
They have to be morning?
They do need to be morning. The room availability is tied up for
okay.
afternoons.
Okay. Well, if you can make 2 of them, that would be great.
Well, yeah, I was hoping, we can't do evening meetings like 7 o'clock p.m.? We can't do that?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to do that?
Nobody wants to do that.
All right.
But
retirement community. You're supposed to be.
But make sure you have put together some written comments, okay? Go through it.
So
pick out
I
focus
think based on the
items.
anticipation, though, is you're going to go through element by element and just say, okay, who needs to talk about or who wants to talk about
That's what I'm gonna
issues
do.
in element 1, element 2, element 3.
That's what I'm going to do.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add.
See, I've already got my homework done.
Okay, one of the foundations of this growing smarter legislation and general plans and the adoption process and ratification process is to ensure maximum public participation. I'm not standing here suggesting you do a workshop and allow public comment throughout the workshop, but I think it'd be very appropriate to have an item on that agenda, perhaps at the end of the agenda, to call to the public.
Sure.
If there are any comments with
Sure.
respect to what you've discussed.
Absolutely. Sure, we can do that.
We will make that happen. We will be
Okay.
polling you for your availability. So.
All right. Are we done here?
Comments?
Any comments from the public on
Or
what we're
additional.
discussing? Any comments from commissioners? Anything to have to do with current events or anything we need to know about?
Nothing. I'm fine, sir.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have to close?
We'd like to do one thing before you close the meeting today. We'd like to introduce our newest planner, Mr. Frank Hall. Who's arrived in
Okay.
booth
Frank.
here from Maryland. We're glad to have you.
He's leaving
So if
tomorrow.
you see Frank
Oh, you leaving tomorrow?
This meeting.
What school?
I'm just making sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
What school did you go to?
I went to University of Maryland.
Oh, okay. Yeah, very liberal.
Not where I lived.
Okay, do I have to officially close anything?
No.
Okay.
No, this is just a meeting.
We're adjourned.
Thank you, sir.
So, Jeff,
Huh? Tough.